If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this.
The creepiest paranormal encounters, folklore creatures, scary legends, mythological beings, fairies, or ancient terrifying entities people have encountered where they live.
I'm from a small town in Alabama, and around here we really only have two local legends. One being Smedley Road, which is an old dirt road that goes on for miles and miles and crosses through various towns and highways. There are a variety of local legends associated with Smedley Road, ranging from ghost trains, my friends have fervently claimed to have heard them while camping there, to satanic churches, as well as intriguing tales of malfunctioning bridges that unexpectedly turn around when you park and turn off your lights. The other is the Alabama White Thing, which is much more of a statewide phenomenon. It is described as an albino Bigfoot, based on accounts from my grandfather and his mother before him. Yet to see it myself, but I believe there's something out there. This is a bit more of a ghosty thing, but it's pretty well known in / around Utah, and I think it's bordering on local legend at this point, so bear with me. So there's a grave in Salt Lake City called Emo's Grave. The folklore behind it is that if you walk around the grave 3 times chanting Emo and then look inside the mausoleum, you'll see blood-red eyes until you blink or look away again. The real man's name was Jacob, and he died in Europe, but by the time the grave had finished, some rumor about the grave belonging to a man/demon named Emo started circulating, and that's how the tradition started. Here's why it's my favorite. I thought it was like a Bloody Mary type of story, something that kids did for fun, you know? One night, while I was in Salt Lake with some spare time, my friend and I decided to try it for ourselves. So we went and did the circle thing and then looked in the mausoleum. Saw nothing. I looked up over the grave after looking in and saw the eyes in the darkness. It was crazy. Found out later on that they had covered the holes in the door with something, and people had started to see the eyes outside of the glass. Texas Goat Man. Okay. So around 2010 or 2011, I was up late at night. Feeling bored and restless, I decided to take out the trash. It was around 3 a.m. I go outside to dump the trash, I look up the street, and I see this standing goat-like figure in the middle of it. It appeared confused as it looked around at its surroundings. I froze in my spot, almost peeing my pants. I could see the traces of horns and hooves on the streetlights. I didn't want the creature to see me, I didn't know what it would do, so I ran inside. My eyes were watering. I run upstairs to my room to see if I could see it, and it was gone. I told my sister about it, and she didn't believe me. Fast forward 2 years later, there was this show called Monsters and Myths in America, where it showcased the Texas Goat Man. I immediately called my sister and told her to put it on. I screamed, and she screamed, saying, "Isn't that what you described to me years before?" I said yes. That's precisely what I saw. I told you I wasn't lying. She freaked out and was thrilled to hear that I wasn't crazy. Other people in Texas have seen it too. I'd like to add mine. In 2021, I was in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and I was sitting on the beach alone during a silent lightning storm at night, and all of a sudden I felt this intense urge to run into the water. Mind you, I don't swim. After a while the urge intensified, and I stupidly went to put my feet in the water. I remember the water was bubbling and it was pitch black, and I immediately felt this sense of dread and danger and ran out of the water. After getting out, I went back to sit down on my folding chair, and out of nowhere a bolt of lightning lit up the sky and the sea, and I saw a big black figure with long hair not too far away from me staring at me from the water. After the lightning was gone, the figure was nowhere to be found. I sat out there for a half an hour after trying to figure out what that figure I saw was, but it never appeared again. I really believe it was a mermaid trying to take me to the sea. The Men with Bird Hands. Hey everyone, I would like to share this story. I've heard about 2 men who supposedly lived in the Daedalus cave in Penteli, Athens, Greece. Some people from the area have said they've encountered them close to the forest and the cave. Well, I need to tell you that there are many theories about this cave. Theories abound about the existence of other dimensions and the possibility of traveling to distant locations through this cave. Even with UFO sightings and people losing their memory, there's the phenomenon of negative gravity, which is amazing. There's so much electromagnetic activity. People who claim to have seen these beings report that they always walk with their hands behind their backs, leading some observers to believe they do not have hands. However, a closer look from behind reveals that their hands resemble bird-like claws. They never spoke, almost like they couldn't, and they were very tall and pale. This could easily be just a spooky story, but if it isn't, what do you think these beings might be? Could they actually be from a different dimension? Or are they entities? Or just people who were born like this? There are also sightings of angels and ghosts in the area, so maybe it's all illusions from the huge electromagnetic energy? Furthermore, Another fact about the cave is that the compasses go crazy there, and during 1977, they said the army actually did some experiments there. And after the 90s, Satanists actually went there for, their rituals. Little People in Appalachian Mountain Stories. When I was 7 years old, my family would go camping, and my grandparents used to tell me to watch for the little people on your camping trips. I didn't believe them until I was 8. My dad and I were down by the creek when he walked back to the camping spot. I then saw a little man, about 2 feet tall, on the other side of the creek waving for me to come over. I started to go towards him, but when my dad returned, I looked back across the creek and he was gone. And now that I'm older, I looked it up, and it's true, it's folklore, so I still think I saw a little person. They draw people into the woods and use them as bait for food. Creature, the hodag of Wisconsin. It's thrown in with cryptids because of its recentness, but the story is more of a folk tale like Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. The hodag, a creature that bears resemblance to a dinosaur, bulldog, and frog, emerges from the ashes, akin to a phoenix, following the burning of mistreated working oxen. Myths, Tithonus and Eos. This lesser-known Greek myth is mentioned by both Plato and Sappho. Tithonus was a prince of Troy who caught the eye of Eos, the goddess of the dawn. They struck up a relationship, and Eos decided to petition Zeus to make Tithonus immortal so that they could stay together forever. Zeus granted the request, but with a catch because he's an asshole, he only granted eternal life but not eternal youth. So Tithonus would continue to wither and age but never die. Throughout the years Eos took other lovers but kept the aging Tithonus in her care, as she still loved him. To release him from his curse, she transformed him into a cicada, a symbol of rebirth. Legend, the Kingdom of Amarugia. I'm going to get hyperlocal with this one, lol. I grew up in western Missouri near a conservation area called the Amarugia, pronounced Amarugi, Highlands, which is a hilly forested area with some campgrounds and fishing holes but largely unoccupied and unvisited except for a few locals. Legend has it that when Missouri was starting to see conflict from the Civil War, Confederate guerrilla fighters often struck towns bordering Missouri and Kansas. Jesse James was in their ranks and sought refuge among Confederate sympathizers near Amarugia. A group of nearby residents of Cass County abandoned their towns to live peacefully in the Amarugia Highlands. They formed a patrilineal kingdom ruled by a king whose title was passed down for a few generations before the entire community up and vanished around the early 1900s. Supposedly they stashed hordes of cash, bonds, gold, and ammunition they had hidden from both Confederate and Union forces all around the Highlands. Some say they just died off. A handful of families with no outsiders can only reproduce for so long in seclusion. Others say they just assimilated back into the general population without ever mentioning their history. Fewer still say they were cursed for their neutrality in the conflict and selfishness for their hoarded treasure, and that the forest itself slowly devoured the entire community and would do the same to anyone who sought the treasures. A lot of native peoples from North and Northeast Canada have tales of a group of people called the Adlets, who are a secluded tribe of people who have dog-like features, such as snouts and digitigrade legs. However, descriptions vary. In some stories they're cannibals, and in others they're said to be much taller and more violent than humans. The term Adlet was also typically used to denote other native tribes from inland regions, and some groups from Labrador and the Hudson Bay instead use the term Urkaglit. The etymology of the term is quite convoluted, but the creatures that it's sometimes associated with are one of my favorite pieces of Inuit lore. Some folklore is true. I've just recently had an interest in listening to scary stories. I used to just listen to them on YouTube or podcasts. Because of all the scary stories, I stumbled upon this story called My Trip to the Philippines, and it triggered a story I tried to forget. Now, I've heard stories of the Manananggal and Tik-Tik when I was younger but never really paid attention to them, as I grew up in Manila and folklores were stories to keep kids from misbehaving. For those who aren't familiar, a Manananggal is usually a woman who can separate her upper torso from the limbs and grow wings to fly around and eat fetuses from a pregnant woman's belly. And the Tik-Tik is kind of the same, but they have long, thin tongues to probe the mother's belly. Basically they're like the Filipino vampires. If that doesn't put you in your place as a kid, I don't know what will. So when I was 10 and living in a province at the south of Luzon, this happened. My mother was a few months pregnant with my baby sister, and my dad was away at work overseas. One night I heard something clawing at the roof of our small home and a strong gushing wind. The sound was so loud that it woke me and my mom up. I looked out the bedroom window to see what it was, but as soon as I pushed the curtains aside, the sound stopped. I went back to bed. I slept next to my mom to keep her company. A few minutes later and the sound came back, along with that clicking sound you'd hear from a regular lizard. This carried on for a week. Every night, it's the same annoying sound. I thought it was a cat clawing on our roof, but how could its tiny claws sound so horrible while it tried to scrape through the metal roof? I couldn't explain the noise that sounded like huge wings flapping. I wasn't afraid, I was curious. Still, every time I'd try to see what it was, the noise would stop. I knew this wasn't a dream, because 13 years later I asked my mom about it, and I asked her how the noises stopped. All she stated was that she positioned garlic near the windows, and it ceased bothering her. In Bartonville, Illinois, about a 15-minute drive from where I live, there is an old insane asylum. The people from Ghost Hunters, or whatever it's called on the animal planet, actually came here. Anyway, there are a couple of graveyards that surround the place, and there was a man who kept watch over all of the graves. His name was the Bookbinder. He used to stand by this old tree during every funeral and weep for the fellow patients who had passed. Finally his time had come, and he passed away. Since then there have been rumors and sightings of him still standing by that old elm tree, and sometimes you can hear a weeping noise coming from it. There also have been reports of it bleeding. Personally, I don't believe it, but it's still an interesting story, and the whole place has an incredibly interesting story. So many to choose from, but I'll share one from the town I grew up in since maybe it's not so well known outside of it. There's a place called the Gates of Hell in New Jersey. It's an old underground network of tunnels and sewers. It's supposedly riddled with tons of graffiti, and reportedly cults have made sacrifices there. The legend states that the tunnels have various levels, which are said to lead to the devil or hell. Some stories mention a secret room deep within and some other creepy happenings. Nowadays you can get arrested for trespassing, as it's actually very dangerous and can flood in the rain. I've never been myself. And some from my parents' homeland are La Tunda and Patasola. The Tunda is a shapeshifter who can change her form into a loved one or beautiful woman, but she would have to hide her leg, which was always a wooden stirring spoon. She would feed victims her butt-cooked shrimp to keep them docile and feed on their blood. The Patasola was a scorned or unfaithful woman, depending on the variation of the story. She is a beautiful woman with one bovine hoofed leg who would lure men into the forest, feed on their blood, and devour them. She is also a vengeful protector of the forest, supposedly attacking human ancestors. The rake seriously creeps me out. This pale, humanoid creature with hollow eyes and razor-sharp claws supposedly stalks people in the dead of night, watching them sleep before attacking. The stories about it feel too real, people waking up to see it crouched at the foot of their bed, whispering in some inhuman voice. Even worse, some claim that just knowing about the rake makes you a target. So, if I disappear after this, you know why. Ever heard of the rake? Or is there another urban legend that keeps you up at night? When I was 9 years old, I had an encounter that I still can't explain, and it stayed with me all these years. I'm 17 now, and the more I learn about Fey lore, the more I believe what I saw was something from the Unseelie court. I was in the shower when I suddenly felt the urge to look over, and there it was. About 2 feet tall, pale, and dressed in all black. No wings. Its face was blurred and distorted, like I couldn't really focus on it. It ran unnaturally fast, back and forth and in circles, glitching in and out almost like broken animation. And it laughed, not joyfully, but childlike in a destroyed, mocking way. It felt like it wanted to mess with me, feed off my fear, and raise chaos out of nowhere. I panicked and ran out of the shower right away. The whole encounter was short, maybe only seconds, but the energy in the room was unforgettable, chaotic, not light or playful, but destructive. It only ever happened once, but even now, 8 years later, I'm certain it wasn't just a ghost or my imagination. The speed, the distortion, and especially its size all fit with the lore of Unseelie Fae. Has anyone else here had encounters with Unseelie or Fae-like beings? How did you deal with them? We have the official most haunted road in the US. I thought it was just because it's super windy and narrow and the trees lean in on you, but there are a ton of stories about this road. There used to be a hairpin turn, fixed a few years ago, that led straight into the lake from the right direction. Back in the 80s a car went over the edge, and a young boy drowned. Occasionally, before the barrier's relocation, you could spot him sitting on it and waving at you. There's a tall white woman in a flowing white dress who just stands in the middle of the road and stares you down with her hands over her heart. Flashing your headlights and slowing down can make her go away. There's a pair of floating red eyes that move through the woods at night. No one has ever seen what they belong to. Sometimes a truck will appear on the road behind you and ride really close for a bit, then vanish, only to reappear a few minutes later, occasionally running people off the road. There are rumors of a cannibalistic albino colony living in the deep woods. I'm from the Bay Area. I grew up just north of the Golden Gate Bridge. In 2008 I moved to the 7 cities of Hampton Roads. After living in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and Chesapeake, I fell in love with an old Victorian house in Portsmouth. A few years ago, my boyfriend and I were walking our dog near the creek in West Parkview. It was late and very cold out. As I approached the small bridge that separates the creek from the Elizabeth River, I saw 2 people ahead of us when a car turned and its headlights illuminated them about 15 feet away. I yelled back to my boyfriend to secure our dog, for she was not on a leash. I know what I saw, 2 people walking towards us. But as the gap between us shortened, they disappeared. There was no place for them to go. A large cyclone fence separates the street and sidewalk from the bridge and water. I looked for several minutes but found nothing. The very next day, my boyfriend was coming home from work, and as he passed through Ghent towards the Midtown Tunnel, he said it was very dark out, and traffic was thick. He said in the corner of his eye, he saw 2 images on the side of the road. They had no distinctive features, and if one of them hadn't moved, he said he would have written them off as shadows. He turned to look at them straight on as he slowly drove past them, and how he described them gave me chills. I don't suffer from mental illness, and neither does my boyfriend. I do know my neighborhood is very close to the Great Dismal Swamp. In the middle of that swamp sits Lake Drummond, a freshwater lake. No one can understand how Lake Drummond, a perfectly preserved and clean lake, exists independently from the swamp without mixing with it. There are stories and recent evidence of human life existing in the Great Dismal Swamp. However, the government restricts scientists and explorers seeking answers to these questions, not due to any nefarious reasons, but because the depth and contents of the swamp are undocumented. It could be extremely dangerous. What did we see that night? My dog oftentimes will freak out in that exact same spot, yet we haven't seen anything since. That's my Virginia story. I have a feeling it's not over. Our little corner of southwest Missouri was explored by Spanish soldiers in search of treasure in the early to mid-16th century. It is said during one of these expeditions, a force of conquistadors arrived and built a fort on top of a mountain they called El Azafate, or Bread Tray, due to the mountain's strangely flat peak. From this fort, they mined silver until they were slaughtered by local Native Americans. 300 years later, following the Lewis and Clark expedition, white settlers began arriving to the region, and they rediscovered the abandoned fort and, according to rumor, the secret Spanish silver mine. According to local legend, the sounds of fighting and dying Spaniards can be heard in the vicinity on certain nights. It is also said the mine is cursed, either by the bloody, horrible deaths of the Spaniards or because it is in a cave sacred to the native tribes. The family that owned the property in the late 1800s lost 2 members, a son and his young wife, and their ghosts are said to haunt the entrance to the mine where they died extracting silver. Perhaps the mine entrance collapsed and the family was unable to open it again? Perhaps the ore just played out and the family moved on. Over time, the true location of the mine was lost to history, but the myths and legends persist. When I was younger we were told about the little girl whose body was found in the woods by my school. If she becomes your friend, she will slowly start to take over your body, and you will become the girl in the woods. Well, in first grade a girl in third grade started getting sick. But she only got sick when she entered the church. She would pass out, vomit, scream, and yell every time she entered the church. Then one day it stopped, she was perfectly normal and a little ditzy. Next year I go to the bathroom by myself, and I hear a girl crying in the stall. I ask if she is okay, and she says she misses her family. I asked if she wanted a hug, and when I opened the door, she was gone. My heart dropped, and I ran out of the bathroom crying. Now you will never catch me going back to my old elementary school ever again. The Fae have no human morals, they cannot be judged by our standards. I come from a family of sensitives who have practiced earth and, then later, candle magic for generations. We are a diverse group, born and raised in London, with half Irish and half Spanish ancestry and additional French and Scandinavian blood on my dad's side. I've had paranormal and supernatural experiences all my life, as has the rest of my family. Because of our belief system, we interact with nature spirits and deities daily, and the existence of the Fae, or Fae, as we call them, is accepted and almost taken for granted. When I was a very young child, my gran, who half raised all of her grandchildren, believed that my imaginary best friend, Bat Bear, was in fact a puka. Pukas are Fae creatures from Celtic mythology, and we were knowledgeable about this mythology and lore because we lived with several elders who told us stories of the Fae world as well as Spanish and Scandinavian folklore. At that time, I didn't fully understand or care about Bat Bear's identity, but as I grew older and learned more about my culture and belief system, I realized that Bat Bear resembled the typical imagery of a puka. Bat Bear was my childhood imaginary friend. He was a small bear-type creature the size of a 6-year-old with long bat ears, dressed in a red jumper and blue dungarees with gold buttons. He was with me from the age of 3 to 9. He was what my gran thought to be a puka, pronounced puka. The puka is a faya, fairy, creature that is a shapeshifter, but it appears as a horse, goat, dog, cat, raven, rabbit, and most commonly a hare. It was believed that in the rural areas of Old Ireland they could bring ill or good fortune to the farms and hamlets that they haunted. Bat Bear never told me to do bad things, never did anything creepy or crazy. If anything, he made me want to behave. When I got cross, naughty, or sad, he calmed me and always led me to amend my behavior. Bat Bear wasn't good, nor was he bad, he just existed. He used to curl up at the end of my bed to sleep, sit beside me on the floor as I played, and sit beside me when I was in my wheelchair. We read together. He was around for 6 years, then he was gone as suddenly as he arrived. My gran used to say that pukas were wild and Bat Bear was wild. Looking back at him now, I think he really was a puka, a generous one, and I believe that gran saw him too. I still like to think he was there when I needed him. Banshee. My gran was from Ireland, she told me, and my cousins told scary bedtime stories about the banshee. She once told us that when she was 13, she was running an errand for her mom with her sister Mary. They had to go through a wooded area to get to the next small town, which was their destination. There was a small stream where the kids used to fish and play. They were approaching the stream, and from a little distance, Mary said to Gran, "What's that, Annie?" They both stopped and looked. Beside the stream, with her back to them, was a figure of a woman with long dark hair. She wore a light-colored dress, and her feet were bare. They were silent so they could hear soft, gentle weeping. Without waiting another minute, my gran said she and Mary turned and ran the other way as fast as they could. When they got home, they told their dada about their adventure. Their mum wasn't too happy that they returned without completing the errand. Their dad said it was probably the banshee, their mom just rolled her eyes and mumbled something under her breath. The next day, a younger child known to the family was found face down in the stream at the same location where they had seen the woman. People believe that the appearance of the banshee often precedes tragedies or deaths. Thank you for listening. We have the story of little people in indigenous culture. They can be helpful or harmful, depending on you. They can change their size and look many different ways. We have many names to call them by. For example, I've heard stories of hunters getting lost, turning around on the ice, and then little people showing up and showing them the way back. We also have a story where we blame things going missing around the house on the little people. If one of your earrings goes missing, it's because the little people took it. If something isn't where you remember putting it, the little people are messing with you, and you need to get right. I've also had experience where we were walking at the university I attended. It was late, and I and 2 friends were walking back to our dorm, and there was a wetland that we had to cross through. It usually was quietly peaceful, but that night it was dead quiet, and I heard this sound to the side. No one else heard it, but I saw one of them. They looked ragged and rough, like a wild animal but still humanoid. They were on all fours and were leaning down to drink from the water, and I just remember thinking, that's not good water to drink from. Then it looked up, and its eyes were silver. I told them we needed to hurry and leave, that I saw something, and they said there was nothing there. I was like, I'm going to leave you if you don't hurry your asses up right now, lol. I was not playing. I'll never forget that moment. It happened beneath the trees, in the darkness illuminated by the moon, and I still saw silver in its eyes. I don't understand why I was scared, maybe just that it showed itself to me for whatever reason. The Lake Manitou Monster. On January 10, 1834, Sanford C. Cox, accompanied by Major C., whose identity remains unclear, set out from Lafayette to explore the area of northern Indiana that is now within the counties of Fulton, Pulaski, Marshall, Stark, Kosciuszko, and Elkhart. At that time, a journey of 100 to 200 miles took much longer than it does today. The first day they passed through Delphi and stayed overnight at Lockport. The second day they passed through Logansport and stayed all night at a farmhouse 6 miles farther north on the Michigan Road, having ridden leisurely and examined lands on the Eel River most of the afternoon, being land hunters on the lookout for land to enter. Their landlord advised them to go on to the Potawatomi Mills, erected at the outlet of Manitou Lake some 20 miles north, and from that point to keep up the Tippecanoe River to its head near the Turkey Creek Prairie. Continuing, Mr. Cox said, "We followed his directions and took up our lonesome journey along the frozen Michigan Road, which led through a dense, continuous forest. In the afternoon we arrived at a Mr. Bozarth's, near the Potawatomi Mills. His small, double cabin, which stood near where the town of Rochester now stands, was a welcome sight to us, being the only house we had seen after we started in the morning. Here we stopped for the night and were well entertained by Mr. Bosworth and his pleasant and fascinating family, who, though domiciled in the wilderness, would have graced the better circles of metropolitan life. We began our journey after an early breakfast, passing the Potawatomi Mills during the first half-hour's ride. We stopped for a short time and viewed the celebrated Lake Manitou, or Devil's Lake, where the Indians averred a giant monster had been seen in the shape of a serpent, which defied all human efforts to snare it. The Potawatomi Indians had a tradition that a serpent-shaped monster existed in this lake long before they crossed the hard waters of the north. Their superstitious dread of this lake was such that they would not hunt upon its borders nor fish in its waters for fear of incurring the anger of the evil spirit that made its home in this little woodland lake, which perhaps is some 3 or 4 miles in length, with a breadth averaging from 1/4 to a half mile, quite irregular, sometimes quite narrow for several hundred yards, resembling a narrow, sluggish river, at other places widening into bays and more extended sheets of water that reflected sky and forest like a mirror. The ground's appearance suggested that the lake had originally been much larger and that its waters had gradually receded, a fact confirmed by some of the earliest settlers in the area, who reported having fished years earlier in parts of the lake that had since become partially or completely dry land. When the government officers were about erecting the Potawatomi Mills, the Indians strenuously objected to the erection of a dam at the outlet of the lake, lest its accumulated waters might disturb and overflow the subterranean chambers of Manitou, and the exasperated demon rush forth from his watery dominions and take indiscriminate vengeance on all those who resided near the sacred lake. And to convince the government officials of the real existence of this monster and his terrible paroxysms of rage, which were periodical, they stated that certain seasons of the year the fishes became so alarmed that they rushed pell-mell to the outlet of the lake in large schools or shoals to escape the exasperated monster that threatened their destruction. Austin W. Morris, who surveyed the lake for the mills, said that some of his flagmen were so frightened by a monster in the water that they fled to shore, making it difficult to find someone to carry the red flag. Mr. Morris never claimed to know whether the flagmen actually saw anything terrifying in the water or if their fears were simply a product of their imagination after hearing the Indian legends. Urban legend turned true. In my town, Missoula, there's a smaller town about 40 minutes away called 9 Mile. My friends and I have been going hunting there for 5 years. While we were hunting, we stopped at a friend's house in the small town, and they were having a small get-together with their neighbors. They shared stories of this creature they called the 9 Mile Thing, or the Thing, for short. They said it was the product of someone who brought too many electronics while camping and was mauled by a bear, but they couldn't get out due to all their boxes blocking the way. Apparently he used his electronics to keep him alive. We thought it off and decided to go hunting anyway. When we went out, we came to a ledge with a little creek bed. We hung out in that area until it got dark. When we decided to go back due to the shooting light being gone, we heard footsteps coming down the trail, so we tried to look for blaze orange on this guy. No orange. He kept walking, and then I could finally make out his shape. Everything was black except the sky, and we forgot headlamps. He was limping, and I asked if he needed help. He stopped and looked at me. His head was rectangular, and his arms were bent in unnatural ways. He proceeded to stand there, and a loud hum buzz was coming from him. We decided to book it out of there. Since we decided to hunt in other portions far away from that area. If any of you live in Montana or near 9 Mile, please help with this. One story my parents grew up with was El Hombre del Saco. It's like El Coco, kids that behave badly or aren't home by dawn will be trapped by him and will never be seen again. Las Palomas, the big black moths, are a sign of death or bad fortune. If there are many around, specifically in the house, something bad is going to happen. There are a lot of regional ghost stories like La Casa de los Tubos, La Rumorosa, or Mothman. There is also El Charro Negro, the devil or a demon who goes around offering deals to people in exchange for something. I have a story that my grandfather told me about my great-grandfather. Back in the day when he worked on a ranch, he was supposed to deliver something to the neighbor farm, but to do so, he needed to pass a small valley at night, but there were local legends that the ghost of a woman lurked in the valley searching for her beloved and targeted man. My great-grandpa didn't believe it, so he went anyways. Halfway through the valley, his horse began to act scared, but he assumed there were coyotes until, supposedly, he heard the voice of a woman in his ears and felt someone hugging him from behind. The horse freaked out and threw him out of the saddle, hurting his leg. Out of pure fear, he managed to get on the horse again and ride as fast as he could to the farm. After that he never went through that valley at night again. I don't know if the story is true or not, and it's decades old, so it might be distorted a little bit, but stories like this are common in rancherias. Japanese soldiers supposedly spotted a mermaid during World War II. Mer beings. Whether you believe they are possible or not, it is undeniable that half-human/half-fish beings are a recurring theme around the world and across cultural divides. Japanese soldiers from the K Islands of Indonesia reported an interesting case in 1943. The southeastern part of Indonesia's Maluku Islands is home to the K Islands, also known as the Kai Islands. Known for their beautiful beaches and unspoiled scenery, the K Islands span a total area of around 555 square miles. It was in this gorgeous island paradise of postcard-perfect, pristine white sand beaches that a most peculiar and mysterious case occurred. In 1943, Japanese soldiers stationed with a surveillance team on a small, remote island within the K Island chain reported seeing strange creatures in the water that were said to have limbs and a face somewhat similar to a human but a mouth like a carp. These creatures were described as being around 150 centimeters tall and having pink skin, as well as prominent spines on their heads. Unlike classical mermaids, these mer-beings did not have fish tails but rather 2 arms and 2 legs. On several occasions, these beings were seen cavorting about near beaches or in lagoons. In one case, 2 of the odd creatures were spotted playing in a lagoon, and another was reportedly seen swimming near a beach in a manner similar to a human doing the breaststroke. A startled soldier reported seeing one of the creatures on a beach one night. At first the soldier had thought it was a child until it turned around and he could see in the moonlight that its facial features were not quite right. The creature quickly ran headlong into the water upon being seen and did not resurface. Although the Japanese soldiers were deeply perplexed by these sightings, these creatures were not unknown to the indigenous people of the islands. When asked about them, villagers in the vicinity told the Japanese that they were known locally as the orang ikan. In Malay, orang means human and ikan means fish, so we have something akin to man-fish. The villagers said they were sometimes caught in nets, and if another was caught, the Japanese would be told. The chief of the nearby village summoned Mr. Taro Hariba, the sergeant of the surveillance team, one evening. It was announced to Hariba that an orangutan had been found dead on the beach earlier that day, and the body was available for viewing. The sergeant was dumbfounded by what he was to find sprawled out upon the grass at the chief's home. Horibe described the dead creature as being around 160 centimeters long and possessing a head of red-brown, shoulder-length hair and spines along the neck. The face was said to be quite ugly, with human-like and ape-like features, a low, short nose, a broad forehead, and small ears. The lipless mouth was wide like that of a fish, specifically described like that of a carp, and filled with tiny, needle-like teeth. The creature's fingers and toes were long and webbed. Hariba also reported that there was some sort of algae attached all over its body. Sergeant Hariba, although having sighted the orangutan himself on several occasions, could not fathom what it was that he had seen at the chief's home. There was no known creature residing on the island that could have possibly accounted for the dead creature he had witnessed, and the sight of the carcass had deeply disturbed him. Upon returning to Japan, Hariba told of his experiences and urged zoologists to go investigate the phenomena, but no one took him seriously. The fact that he had taken no photos did not help his cause, and in the end he was mostly ridiculed. What is it these soldiers were seeing? What kind of carcass was found at the chief's house? Could there have been a real animal behind this case? The local villagers certainly believed in the existence of this animal, illustrating a classic case where an ethnically recognized creature becomes known to confused outsiders. It does not appear that these mysterious mer-beings can be merely attributed to the wild imaginings of the foreign Japanese in a strange land under harsh conditions. This still keeps me awake. Okay, so I am from Europe, and my country is known to be full of urban legends and scary stories, which can be or aren't true. That doesn't scare me, however. When I heard this story from someone I trust completely, I froze. So, let's start. My cousin, who at the time was my professor, Lucky Me Lowell, was invited to the family meeting by one of her friends. It was in some village pretty far from town, so they all went by car. There were 4 of them. They went there, everything was great. They met with the friend's family and everything. And then somewhere around 11 p.m. they sat in the car and started to go back home. It was pitch dark out there, with woods all around and only the road in front of them. When they saw it. At first they approached the dog in the middle of the road. The dog, or that thing that looked like a dog, was looking the other way, they couldn't see his face. The driver sat on his siren literally, but nothing, it wasn't scared or even moved a bit. That lasted for maybe 20 seconds when that thing looked at them. It had a human face and, as they described, something like braids instead of hair. And then it ran away. It was the worst moment in their life. It felt like something changed after that, they said. They experienced strange feelings, overwhelming fear, and intense screaming. They finished their trip literally in shock. My cousin then decided she needed to find out what that experience was, so they all went to a fortune teller, which I believe is called a pythoness. Something like a fortune teller. And she told them that they literally saw the devil himself. And that the only reason they are alive is the fact they had the cross somewhere in the car or something holy. She also explained the reason for his presence. There is something like a custom in my country, it's to carve a cross on the nearest tree when someone dies. And she said that the tree, like that, was really near us when we saw it. I don't understand why he was there, to collect souls? But I know it's the scariest story I ever heard. I know she didn't lie because her family too knew about this, and they were worried about her because she was scared of everything after this. Crazy, don't you think? The creature in the countryside. Live in a small village in rural England. Every night when it gets dark, I like to go on a walk through the rural walking paths to get away from busy life and to have peace and quiet to relax. The small village I live in is in a forest, and within this village is a graveyard. At the end of this graveyard is a gate that connects to a large opening of grassland in the middle of the forest. When I go on my nightly walks, I enjoy walking through this graveyard, through the gate, in order to get to this clearing so I can sit and clear my mind under the moonlight. I have never had any issues doing this, but on one particular night, I followed my usual routine of walking through the gate to the clearing and sitting down on the fallen tree located just behind the gate. So I sit there, and 5 to 10 minutes go by, and I hear this noise. I can't fully understand what I hear, but this clearing is so dark I can't even see my hand in front of my face, so in order not to panic myself, I pass it off as being a rabbit or fox rustling in the bushes. 5 minutes go by, and I hear nothing else at all, so I forget about it. Then all of a sudden, I hear a noise in my right ear from the same spot. It sounds like something is running straight towards me. You can hear how fast it's coming, and you can also clearly hear that this isn't a small animal. It sounds huge, and I could hear it quite clearly charging straight towards me. My body instantly goes into fight or flight, and I lie back in panic, putting my hands over my face and kicking my legs up into the air as this running gets closer and closer. When it is only about 1 to 2 feet in front of me, I hear a sound resembling a paw kicking up dirt on the floor, similar to how a bull does when it is about to charge. So I instantly stand up and try to see what is obviously right in front of me, to which I see 2 red eyes 5 to 6 feet in the air and the outline of a black fur-covered body, which I can faintly see from the light of the moon. This sight puts extreme fear into me, to the point I'm standing there shaking, staring right at it. I start to back off slowly without taking my eyes off of it, and I get behind the gate to the graveyard, shutting it, still staring at this thing, unable to take my eyes away. When I get back in the graveyard with the gate now closed, staring at it, the head of this thing turns to look out into the middle of the clearing and runs away faster than I had ever seen anything run before. It was truly terrifying, and I have never returned. As mentioned, I live in England, a place where the biggest wild predators we have are badgers, which stand at roughly 1 foot tall. But the thing I saw was easily 5 to 6 feet tall, standing towering over me. A badger could not have been what I saw. And still to this day I have absolutely no idea what it could possibly have been. Berlin. Myths about the Weisse Frau exist almost everywhere, especially at castles. But they also exist in swamps or at the shore of lakes. The legend is often about a tragic love between a young nobleman and a woman from a lower class. The woman dies a tragic death, for example, walled in and starved to death by the man's father or drowned in the lake. Sometimes the nobleman uses his position or lies about his love for her, and she ends herself after finding out. In the end, the woman is dead and haunts the building or area as Weisse Frau. In some cases she is just an ancestor of the local noble family. In most stories she is not dangerous herself, but she is considered an omen for something. She might warn you or announce a death in the near future. There are possibly thousands of different versions. Also quite common are stories about sunken cities at the coast or in lakes. The reason for the city to be destroyed is often that the inhabitants strayed from God, or they became overly greedy, gluttonous, etc., and God punished them for it. In most legends, there is a part about the church bells that can still be heard at night in heavy rainstorms, the same conditions as when the city sank. Some are most likely based on real events of floods, Rungholt, Vineta, some others are just pure legends and folklore. In my region, Berlin-Brandenburg, there are also stories about Irrlichter in the swamps. They appear at night and are small lights that float around close above the ground. They are considered souls of dead people who can't find peace for whatever reason or are damned to stay on earth for the crimes they did in their lifetime. Depending on their nature, these lights can either help lost wanderers or lure people away from safe paths in the swamp, leading them to drown. I heard this story from several different people who claimed that it happened to either them or their friends. It's about a game you play at summer camp at night. Children go to the forest either alone or in pairs, and others try to scare them. In this particular urban legend, the story always concludes with the kids returning to the camp and saying that while the game was fun, encountering the hangman at the end was a bit too much. The camp counselors are always surprised because they did not include a hangman in the game. Instead, it turns out that someone ended themselves near the camp, and the kids witnessed a real dead body. I live in southwest Georgia, and there are a few, but my favorite is my great-grandfather's account of a local haunt, told to me by my grandmother. There's a quiet country road on the outskirts of nowhere, set between a rolling field and a thick forest of Georgia pines. This road happened to be the route my great-grandfather took in his horse and buggy when he went to town. Now, on this road there are only two landmarks. One is a small country church with a cemetery beside it about 1/8 of a mile from the end, and the other is an old wooden bridge about a mile from the church. My great-grandfather had heard the stories of the haunt and didn't really pay them much mind. That was until he met it in person. He was headed to town on this little country road that he had taken many times when he began to approach the bridge. He was about 20 feet from it when his horses began acting spooked. He did what he could to calm them, but they became increasingly distressed as they got closer to the bridge. They neighed and bucked, all while my great-grandfather fought to keep them from running him and themselves off into the water below. As they got to the middle of the bridge, both horses looked to their left as if they were looking at someone or something as they passed it and became even more upset. Then, all of a sudden, their heads snapped forward, and they went along their way as if nothing had happened. My grandfather was trying to figure out what had just happened when he felt the rear end of his buggy lower as if someone had just sat down on it. He slowly turned to see what it was, and there sat a ghostly figure of a man in dress clothes with a wide-brimmed hat. He said the figure was just staring at the road behind them and never even acknowledged him. My great-grandfather snapped his head forward, just as the horses had done, and began to tell himself he hadn't seen what he had just seen. He waited a moment, then forced himself to look again. The figure was still there. My great-grandfather, an old-school badass, said that was the most terrified he had ever been. The only thing he could bring himself to do was continue on and keep looking forward. He rode another mile or so and came upon the little country church. He said that as he came up on the church, he felt the rear end of the buggy raise up, as if the haunt had left the buggy. He looked behind him, and the ghostly figure was gone. He went on to town, mulling it over in his head, trying to make sense of it all, but he just couldn't. He didn't believe in ghosts. By the time he was headed back from town, he had convinced himself that the whole thing never happened. That is until he got back to the church. As he began approaching the church, the horses began to buck and neigh, as they did before. My grandfather said it was at that point that his blood ran cold and he knew he couldn't deny what he had seen and was, very likely, about to see again very soon. Just as he suspected, the horses fought for a moment and then calmed down, and the rear end of the buggy lowered. Once again, all my great-grandfather could do was stare ahead and keep going. They got to the bridge, the haunt made his exit, and my great-grandfather made his way home. This would occur periodically to my grandfather as well as a few others who lived in the area while making trips to and from town. There's no backstory for the haunt, as far as I know, just sightings. The road was paved about 10 to 15 years ago, and I don't think there has been any activity to speak of since, but at one time, on this quiet country road in southwest Georgia, there was a haunt who just wanted to catch a lift. The story of Spearfinger, a Native American story I grew up hearing in the mountains of Tennessee. This Cherokee which was feared among her people. She was described as being 40 feet tall with skin like rock that no weapon could penetrate. With one long, razor-sharp finger, she would sneak up behind you, stab it through your back, and yank out your liver, eating it in one gulp. More than anything, she loved the flesh of young children. Spearfinger could transform herself into anything or anyone. You never knew if your friend or neighbor was actually Spearfinger in disguise until it was too late. One day, an Indian village knew Spearfinger was fast approaching them. They developed a plan to dig a huge pit surrounding the village and cover it with branches and leaves. When she fell in, they would strike and end her. The whole village came together, putting the plan into action. One particular boy had trouble pulling his weight. His clumsy nature hindered their progress, and his father told him to get out of the way. While feeling sorry for himself, he noticed a bird caught in a honeysuckle tree. Without realizing it, he gently freed the bird, but it didn't fly away. Instead, it landed on the boy's shoulder. The bird thanked him for his kindness and, in return, told him a secret about Spearfinger. It relayed to him that the witch's heart was not located in her chest but at the tip of her razor finger. He was so excited. He ran to his parents to tell them of this newly acquired knowledge. Before he could pass the secret on to his mother, a horrible scream came from the forest. Spearfinger was coming fast and was hungry. As she approached the village, she fell into the pit. Everyone threw rocks at her, but she kept climbing to the top of the pit. They used bows and arrows but still didn't hurt her. Remembering what the bird told him, the boy ran to a warrior. He asked him to aim straight at her spear finger. The warrior raised his bow and arrow, aiming at the razor-sharp finger, and shot. The arrow went through Spearfinger's heart, and she fell over dead. The people celebrated her demise with singing and dancing. Has anybody ever heard of little elves protecting the deep forest of Mexico? My grandpa once told my older brother a story where he went hunting in Mexico by himself. Never do. He said he went hunting one day and shot at a deer, wounding it enough to keep it alive but crippling it. My grandpa intended to kill the deer, but his gun jammed. Suddenly, something resembling an elf, a man who was impossibly short, appeared, grabbed the gun, broke it in half, and told him not to use a gun because it only hurts animals without killing them. Then, the elf healed the deer, and both ran off. I know what elves are, but that's the only thing that comes to mind when my brother tells this story. There are many great examples in Pacific Northwest/Alaska folklore. Look into the Haida and Tlingit lore about the Kushtaka, or land otter people. When you are lost at sea and drowning, you seem to be rescued by people you know, aunt, cousin, etc. They give you a helping hand. You are so delighted to grasp their hand and get pulled into their boat. What a relief when you thought you were drowning. Only later do you remember that these relatives and friends of yours had actually been lost and presumed drowned themselves. They take you off to where they live in inland otter dens, river otters. In the privacy of their homes, you see how their faces have actually become scrunched up and hairy, terrifying, really, because over time they have slowly become more otter-like. And now, so will you. One of the things I've always appreciated about this lore is that it is predicated on the idea that every single person will know loved ones who had drowned before them, a grim reminder of the dangers of a life on the Pacific coast. There's also the Ganakadet, or Wasco. This is a being sometimes referred to as a sea wolf or maybe with something in common with a killer whale. The most famous story I've heard has a young man who is struggling to provide for his wife and mother-in-law. He finds a pool deep in the woods where he sets a trap for the Ganakadet. After he catches it, he skins it and hides the skin in a nearby tree hollow. Whenever he wants, he returns to the pool, puts on the skin, and becomes the Ganakadet. He swims deep into the forest pool to where it connects with the ocean and hunts in the water all night, leaving the catch on the beach for his mother-in-law to find in the morning. When she finally discovers that it is her son-in-law, then he is no longer able to return home and remains Ganakadet forever. This idea of the skin that you can put on and take off it will also reminds me of the Irish Selkie, a half-person/half seal. She can take off her skin and walk as a person, but if she is separated from her skin by too great a distance, she weakens and can die. The traditional story is of a Selkie who left off her skin to marry a human man, and then the husband in a fit of jealousy threw her skin in the sea, dooming her. She leaves him. The wonderful animated movie Song of the Sea is inspired by this myth. I hope that helps. I grew up near the ocean. My father was a fisherman, and our life back then was hard, so we were taught how to fish and dive. I was a kid back then, so I consider myself to not be efficient in diving. My brothers, however, were basically pros when it came to that. Now, what I'm going to tell you is that this was not a one-time experience. I had multiple encounters with them while spending the first 15 years of my life beside the ocean, but at that time, I still didn't have enough knowledge about them, not until we moved out of the community. Our community is small, and because we live on a remote island, access is limited, and the primary source of food and income is the ocean. All my life, I knew that there were creatures of the ocean. It is an open discussion for everyone there. That is why I was secretly shocked that they are still considered myths when my community talks about them as if they were a part of our daily lives. When I was around the age of 4, I would accompany my family when they were fishing. I was around 7 when I realized that there seemed to be a schedule for fishing. We always sat in boats, usually 2, one for my dad, my brothers, and me, and one for my aunt and uncle. One afternoon, I shared a boat with my aunt, uncle, and one of my brothers. We were the only ones there at that time. While my uncle and my brothers were diving, my aunt and I would sit in the boat, waiting for them. Whenever it started to get dark, my aunt would whistle, tap the boat, or even dive herself to tell her husband and my brothers to get out of the water as soon as possible. During this time, my brother and uncle maybe were not aware of the time nor felt and heard the signal, so my aunt told me to stay put on the boat as she swam to inform them. While I was sitting in the boat alone, I saw a hand, I don't know if that was really a hand or not, popping up at the side of the boat. Basically, it had long fingers, and they were doing nothing, not even signaling me to come, not luring me, it was just holding onto the boat. I ignored the hand because I had been warned not to pay attention to any mysterious sights or sounds. After a while, my aunt, brother, and uncle emerged, and we got home. After eating dinner, I told my dad what I saw, and my mother just said, "It was trying to balance the boat and probably guarding you too. Pay your respects when you come back tomorrow." And I did. When I came back the next day, my father set some of the fish he caught free when it was near sundown. And these continued for years. When I would dive myself, my brothers were with me, and they would grab me whenever I was turning in the wrong direction because, according to them, there's a portion where we should cautiously explore to give respect to them, to the guardians, and I complied every time. Whenever I was alone in the boat, it would occasionally shake, and a hand would emerge as if providing support. I merely assumed that they were safeguarding the boat to prevent it from capsizing and that they were simply waiting for their turn to hunt. I heard splashing beside the boat when it was dark and we were late, even though my family was in the deep. Whenever we left before sundown, it did not happen, so I assumed that these were normal and that the guardians of the sea basically ruled the waters. We were just asking for resources. After several years, we left the community because I received an opportunity to study in the city, and that was when I learned about mermaids, which were considered myths. Throughout my childhood, I had thought these were just normal rules of Mother Nature that we had to respect. I will refrain from mentioning my community to avoid disrupting their peaceful atmosphere. Perhaps this is a myth, a truth, or somewhere in between, but it's certainly legendary and the source for a lot of songwriters in southern Indiana. A couple a long while ago lived in a house/cabin in rural Brown County. They had been married and raised children in the home. They were from the time that a marriage was for life and divorce was not acceptable. As the years moved on and the children became adults and moved on and out of that little house, they had nothing but each other out in the woods. They kept to themselves. They had few friends or acquaintances, leaving them largely on their own. One day 911 was dispatched to their little home. The caller stated that her husband had died sometime in the night. When they arrived, what they saw and heard that day lived on in each retelling of this story. She welcomed them at the front door and opened it for them. The house was divided into two parts. One side of the home was hers, the other half his. It wasn't like a line was drawn or anything, but there was a clear division of blank space. Her side was decorated and painted to her taste, and his side was the same. She never said a word while they were working. She just sat on the porch smoking one Virginia Slim after another. Finally, when it was time to load him up to the coroner, she started screaming, "You are not going to let him through this way, he's got his own way. His own way." It was blood-curdling. It went on and on. It became clear to the medics that this elderly man, even in death, was not even allowed to enter any part of her side. His side contained a bedroom, a half bath, and half of the kitchen that had a hot plate. There was no door. He had entered his home using a window. They did as they were told, loaded the gurney flat, and, by hand, moved the body out of the window. As they drove off, she just sat there smoking and blankly stared out into the woods. Whatever happened between them was never known. The Burbalong is said to be an old legend of the Cagayan Sulu Islanders, though I can find only one original reference. A tribe of shapeshifters who assume the form of flying insects, enter human bodies, and eat the entrails. They offer cursed human flesh to their guests, who then become Burbalong, too. They can be killed using a Malaysian kris covered with lime juice. The little people under the house. After some deliberation, I have taken the decision to share about my family's experience with duende, or dwarves. My mom is from the Philippines, and there are many tales of supernatural creatures roaming every stretch of the country. Most sound ludicrous and exaggerated, but none more so than the duende and the experience I'm going to relay. My grandmother kept some chickens and dogs, who roamed the grounds, including a pair of turkeys who would wander underneath the house and freak me out as a child. One day when I was still small enough to walk underneath the house dodging cobwebs and such, I came across some tall, thickly painted red crosses on the stilts and by the high walls surrounding one side of the house. Having never noticed this before, I asked my mom about it, and she proceeded to tell me what they were about. To set the scene, it is important to know details about my mom's family home in the farming provincial area of northern Philippines. My grandparents were rice farmers, and my mom and 3 of her siblings lived in the house with them, either studying at university or working in the nearby city in finance. A typical Tagalog house, raised on stilts, was built sometime during the 1950s and had dark mahogany-type floorboards and furniture. The floor where the dining room crosses into the kitchen, however, is made from bamboo and is springy when walked across. There are small gaps in between these whereby you can see down into the ground underneath the house. The whole compound was fairly sized with concrete and brick walls 8 feet high studded with broken glass for security. My mum lived with her other female siblings, and chores were always shared, including laundry. No one's clothes were kept separate, and everyone's clothing went into one wash basin. The clothes were then hung on the various clotheslines in the backyard. Her youngest sibling, Ella, was around 21 at the time and started to notice her underwear missing from the washing line, prominent gaps where panties were supposed to be drying in the sun. Thinking nothing of it and putting it down to birds or another sibling pulling pranks on her, she learned to ignore it. Weeks passed, and buying knickers was getting to be a very expensive habit. Angry and frustrated about the prank, Ella questioned everyone about why they were picking on her and her underwear only. No one owned up to stealing her panties, with everyone absolutely firm and adamant that it wasn't them and retorts of why on earth would we do that? Ella became less angry but continued to feel frustrated about why only her underwear was missing from a line of 6 other people's items. The maids were questioned, and again, firm shakes of heads followed. There was absolutely no reason for the stealing, the knickers were not expensive, and, dare I say it, some were full of holes. There was completely no reason as to why they were being taken, and of course, to where and for what purpose? The washing was monitored for signs of animals or birds stealing them, and nothing was noted. If it was an animal, it would be very clever for them to only know to steal from one particular person. After so many weeks of this happening, my grandfather, having had enough of the whole situation, called a local mangahula, or psychic, to take a look at the house and investigate who or what might be causing the distress. The mangahula took a walk around the compound and immediately picked up that my family weren't the only ones living at that residence. She sat the family down upstairs and revealed that she had discovered a small family of Duen living under the coconut trees, stretching their territory right up to the area underneath the house itself. Everyone was shocked and slightly bewildered, as no one was particularly superstitious. Yes, they had all heard about the little folk as folklore but never had any connection with them. She mentioned that the Duen were usually tree-living beings, and because they were invisible to people with their third eye closed, only certain people could pick up on their existence. The third eye is the psychic or sixth sense that allows people to see through the veil of our normal world and into another crossover. It is customary in Filipino culture to always say excuse me when walking under trees or in long grass to avoid stepping on the creatures. If you do not, the Duen can cast revenge, either making you sick or injured shortly after. There are both good and bad, tricky and malicious Duen. The mangahula was able to see that the culprit of Ella's panty stealing was a Duen of that family living there. She was also able to explain the reason for this. You see, that particular Duen had a huge crush on Ella and would steal her panties, probably to become noticed or for other unmentionable means. Ella and the family were then led under the house, where every single pair of missing panties was found, tightly and neatly folded and stuffed into cracks underneath the house. The mangahula blessed the house with holy coconut oil, and prayers were said to move on the family of Duen. Afterward, it was advised that red crosses be painted underneath the house and white crosses placed in windows to draw away and discourage anything spiritual from residing there again. To this day, the house is still standing, with its fortress of crosses. Who knows whether or not anything managed to slip past the warnings and is residing there currently, dormant, against the will of my family. For the longest time in my county, the place to go if you wanted to be spooked was Toad Road. This road is in a rural area and goes for about 2 miles in between 2 large fields, where it eventually curves sharply to the right, surrounded by woods. There were 2 legends. One was that an old farmhouse used to sit in a field on the right, where a self-proclaimed witch once lived. Her baby passed away very early on, so she went crazy and took her own life. Legend had it that sometimes you could hear a crying baby in the still of night. If you ventured onto the property, you'd encounter her, and she'd chase you off and scratch up your back. The second urban legend was that deep in the woods, right at the sharp turn in the road, were the 7 gates of hell. There was the entrance to the trail leading deep into the woods, where an asylum once stood at the other end. There were 7 gates to pass through to get there, and the asylum was built so far in so that if there were any escapees, they'd be disoriented and hindered by the thick forest, which would slow them down enough to be caught. The legend claims that one night, a group of patients managed to escape, leading to their removal. This led to reports of hauntings and rumors that if you made it past all 7 gates, there was a portal to hell at the end. Obviously, it was all a hoax, but the stories endured for generations, scaring teens away from trespassing at night. Has anyone heard of any myths or folklore similar to my encounter today? My friend and I went on a run and entered a forest. As soon as we stepped in, he said he felt like we were being watched. About 5 minutes later, we came across this old man and a cat just standing there, looking at us. He didn't speak or nod when we acknowledged him. He just stared. Something about him felt strangely familiar, yet totally off. He looked like my friend's dad. And like a bunch of our other friends' fathers, all at the same time. Except mine. I don't know why. Maybe it's because we're in Norway, and I'm from the Caribbean and not white, and the old man was. He felt evil, like something was deeply wrong. My whole body went into fight or flight, full body chills. His facial expression was almost stone-like. Yellowish eyes, a pretty round face, hands behind his back. He looked old but somehow had no wrinkles. And at his feet was an orange cat. This happened in the forest near Ski, Norway, well, in Ski. Just thinking about him hours later still gives us chills. We were telling another friend about it, and even she got chills before we even mentioned seeing the man. We had just said, "Imagine this," and started describing our run. Although we don't fully understand it, the experience was confusing and very scary. I love horror and scary things, but this felt off, it felt different. My mom, who resides in the Caribbean, told me this story. There was this young girl that had gone on a trip with her family to this beach. The beach is the last stop on the leeward part of the island. This particular beach is not for swimming, it's rumored to have rip tides and strong currents. When locals go to this beach, they go to bathe and frolic in the river that empties out into this beach. The river is pretty big and wide. The river features both shallow and deep areas. Locals usually move around a few rocks to form a little pool, and they have a dip while playing loud music and cooking food on the nearby riverbank. Now this girl, I forgot her name, had gone with her family to the beach and had managed to wander away from them. Apparently she was walking alongside the river and stopped to look at something when shortly after she heard a noise and moved closer to see where the noise was coming from. As she moved up the trail, she stopped and began to stare at a woman she saw sitting on a rock. She described the woman as being half naked with long hair and a tail for legs. At the same time she noticed the creature, it noticed her. To the girl she seemed to be sunbathing, and when she saw that she was being watched, she dived back into the water, and the little girl said that she stood there staring, and as she was about to leave, the woman appeared again. Only this time her upper body was visible. She greeted the girl and asked her to come closer. Being afraid, she shook her head no. The creature asked the girl for her name and told her that it had a gift for her. Then the creature proceeded to open her palm, revealing a pretty gold comb. When the little girl walked over to take the comb, the creature told her that the comb was special and that once she accepted it, she was never to give it away. She asked the girl to promise that she wouldn't give it away. Which she did, and then she took the comb from the strange woman and went back to her family. As she was walking away, she heard a splash and looked back, and the woman was gone. The girl told her family and friends about the woman she met, and some people laughed her off, and some believed her, but her family had proof she wasn't lying because the girl had shown them the pretty gold comb. Now this is where the story gets weird. My mother could not remember if the little girl lost the comb or if she had given it away, but shortly after receiving it, she lost track of it, and soon after, she lost her ability to speak. She went from being normal to mentally disabled. And, although she lived a long life, never regained her senses, she died a few years ago, and my mom retold the story. I was skeptical and asked her how she knew the woman hadn't made up the story. My mom said because they were of the same age group and she grew up in the same village as the girl and they were friends. She said that the girl and her family had told everyone that would listen and that a few people had seen the comb. A few years after she lost the comb, that's when she changed and became disabled. She stayed that way right up until she died. Other people had reported seeing strange women sunbathing in the river where the girl had encountered the creature, but no others reported receiving a comb. Some people reported that the creatures asked them questions. For example, "Do you eat fish?" They said they would become scared and lie, saying that they don't eat fish, and the creatures would let them leave. The sightings went on for a few years, my mom said, until they stopped. She said as the area became a popular site, the sightings stopped. She has told me that story a total of 5 times, and each time she tells it the same. She always gets sad at the part where her friend becomes disabled. Please help, I cannot identify this creature. I'm of Swedish and Italian descent and am greatly interested in the Norse myths and the legends of old. I've been searching for answers on what this is ever since I saw it for the first time, and I still do see it occasionally. I can't seem to find any answers other than the rake. If anyone knows what this creature could be, please let me know. With that being said, let me tell you about the experience. The Watcher. That's what I call it, at least. For reference, I'm going to refer to it as a male, just because that was my first view on it. I've encountered it a few different times, by a few I mean fairly frequently, and sometimes people were with me and saw it as well. I'm only going to describe the first time, however. I used to live in northwest South Carolina. It's a rural place with not much around after you leave the city and go into the country. We had this 6-acre plot of land that we lived on along with my grandparents. There were 2 houses on the land. Our house faced the highway, and their house had its back to a back road. Across this back road was a very old church, and down a path through what I called the tunnel, because trees enclosed the path overhead and made it like a tunnel, was a graveyard. The graveyard was really old. In fact, I found someone who was born in the early 1700s and died in the early 1800s. I always got a weird feeling there. At peace, but also anxious. They weren't the only graves. There were also unmarked graves that were represented by large rocks that had been shoved into the ground, clearly makeshift tombstones. They were said to be Indian or slave graves, depending on who you ask. One night when I was around 14, I had my friend come over. We were very bored, and I decided to show him the graveyard at night. It was about 2 to 4 a.m. After taking forever to convince him, we left. We took 3 flashlights each. We made it all the way to the tunnel when something weird happened. Our lights didn't shine but about 5 feet in front of us. We noticed it, and he said he didn't want to go further. It was like the tunnel was eating our lights, which were military-grade flashlights. Well, I got a sick feeling in my stomach and knew something was there, so, me being the investigative person that I am, I wanted to know what was out there. Despite the fact that he didn't want to keep going, I went. I got a bit down the path before he started walking. I knew he wouldn't want to be alone. Then about halfway down the trail I saw something. At first I thought it was a naked homeless person. It was crouched over, with its head between its knees and its back turned towards the path. Then I said something I regret saying. "Hey! You! Come here!" Well, I can't say it's not my fault because it did. It sounded around a few seconds later and stared at me, looking between 2 trees. Its face had deep black sockets where I couldn't tell if it had eyes. Its arms were long and grotesque, longer than its legs, and its skin was gray. I crouched on the path and didn't take my eyes off of this thing and called out to my friend, "When I say run, you run as fast as you can back to the house." He started questioning me, completely oblivious, and then I ran. The thing hopped out onto the path and began chasing us, and once he saw it, he sprinted off with me. We got back into my yard before I noticed that it wasn't chasing us. It stopped once we got off church grounds and away from the cemetery. Weird. Before you say it was guarding it, I saw it a few more times. Each time it would get closer and closer to my house. We eventually moved for other reasons, and I thought I'd never see him again. Then one night my friend, a different friend than the first one, and I were hanging out in my room. We were just talking, and he wanted a cigarette, and so did I, so I opened my window. It was around the same time as before, sometime in the early morning. We smoked, and then we talked some more. I went to the other side of the room for something, and then I heard him gasp and say, "Nope, not today, not with that shit." And he closed the window. I questioned him, and he described what he saw. It was him. It was the Watcher. I excitedly looked through the blind as if I was missing an old friend and saw him, sitting in the tree line, looking right back at me. I really grew to not mind him. In fact, I would go walking in the woods at night just to see him and watch him while he watched me. Interestingly, this is all he does when I'm alone. Watch. However, if someone is with me, he chases us away from where he is. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm no longer scared of it. In fact, it's more just that I want to understand it than anything. I've seen it again lately, but more recently than that, I heard it. I was talking to my friend about it, and she raised the question, what if it's trying to communicate but doesn't know how? So the last time I heard it, I tried to replicate the noise. It made a sound back. I'm not sure what it wants, but it's shown interest in me. I just want to know what it is. One of my favorite myths is the story of the Yonigan Odd, a mysterious creature from Breton folktales. There are a bunch of different names and retellings of the story, Yonan Ord, Ianik an Odd, Yonig an Aod, etc., but the basics are always the same. The spirit resides near a riverbank or seashore. Usually he is an elderly man rowing a little boat, and calls out 3 times like an owl, which sounds like uho. If someone answers or yells something back, the creature leaps at them and devours them. An Odd and its variations mean of the shore, while Ianik, Jan, and Yonig are given names, often translated as John or Johnny. Collectively, these similar folk monsters are often called Yonig, and they are sometimes likened to fairies or sirens. As legend has it, a local folk hero named Conan Ruse was on an errand for flour to bake bread when he heard the 3 owl-like hoots. Not knowing their origin but annoyed at the noise, he hooted back in a mocking tone. Suddenly, Yonig an Odd appeared and threw the man on his side. Conan, however, was a physically strong young man and managed to overpower his assailant by hitting the creature's feet and causing it to fall on the ground. Conan put his knee on the being's throat and held it down. The creature, now struggling to breathe, begged Conan to release it since apparently he came out of the water too early, before midnight. The man agreed to release his captive but only on the condition that the spirit would tell him some secrets about the world it came from, not the afterlife, but the place between the plane of the dead and the world of the living. This did not please the spirit, who warned that this information was not meant for the ears of a baptized man. Yonaghan-Ad told Conan that the ocean is a living being who sends wrinkles/waves across its skin every day to counteract aging. At sunset, the sun descends into the ocean, warming its heart and waking it. The sea then makes a loud noise with its bowels, and in that hour, the Morgans and other mythical creatures from the depths ring the bells of their underwater towers. At that hour, Yonaghan-Ad rises from between the rocks of the riverside, as these rocks contain the souls of the drowned. Conan remembered that fishermen sometimes see thousands of human corpses in the ocean and asked Yonag what this means. The creature replied that these were the spirits of drowned people who remain in the ocean. When they reach a certain age, drowned corpses can freely move around in the ocean and wander beneath the waves in great numbers. Yonag also told his captor about the green sun, which is the source of the unnatural power that he and the drowned ones have. This sun can be seen underwater at night and has a connection with the afterlife, though the details are not entirely clear to me. When daytime comes, the drowned dead retake their places among the rocks of the seafloor and wait until the green sun rises once again. Conan did not realize the creature's trickery until it was too late. Yonaghan-Ad was buying time with his stories until the clock struck midnight and the green sun arose under the sea. Now back at full power, he fought and ended his enemy. Conan died but managed to scare the spirit, and to this day, the creature is too afraid to let out its cry near Conan's side of the river it inhabits. That being said, though, Yonaghan-Ad is still a dangerous entity, and should you hear its cry, take care not to mock it, for this will entice the ghost to attack you. It is said that if you encounter this spirit, you have to remove your shoes and run barefoot across the beach or riverbank with your shoes in your hands. In addition, Yonaghan-Ad may also come to people's houses. He will knock on the door and ask for a small piece of burned or smoldering wood from the fireplace. You should never give in to this strange request, though it isn't entirely clear to me what will happen if you do or what the ghost plans to use the wood for. These two were from my home country, the UK. I reside in Indiana, US, now and don't know any of the local folklore, otherwise, I'd share something locally based. Epping Forest, Essex, England. There was a couple ended together near a large pond/pool in Epping Forest. Ever since the murder, passers-by are inexplicably drawn to the pond to end themselves out of nowhere. Those who have found the pond just hiking through the forest have said it's strangely black, like tar, devoid of any visible pond features. To me as a child who visited the area, I hated that thought. That people would harm themselves out of nowhere. As an adult, I believe it is more of an urban legend because the area is so large and remote, making it less likely for someone to be heard, seen, or found alive or dead quickly. So it became a well-known unalive spot for that very reason. Every few years, local regional news would report on a body found in Epping Forest that had died by suicide. The second was the Wailing Girl of King's Cross Station, London, England. As a young child I had to travel via King's Cross for several medical appointments a month at a large hospital. By frequently traveling through King's Cross Station, I learned about the legend of the Wailing Girl. I heard the legend from a mix of ghost stories shared by my parents and the station staff. The story revolved around a fire that trapped 11 people on the station's platforms, leading to their horrific deaths. The repairs were made during quiet times, specifically when the trains and tubes were not running. A young girl could be heard wailing in fear. Staff had reported hearing the wailing and would often mistakenly search for someone hurt or trapped somehow after hours. Although I didn't hear anything, the thought of it still gives me a chill. I've witnessed a number of unexplainable incidents involving the underground tubes and trains in that area. Several family members have personally experienced similar incidents at that station, but none have anything to do with the wailing child. I'll go ahead and share two mermaid/merman stories, neither of them involving myself. The first sighting was from my great-grandmother. I'll refer to her as my GG. I never got to know her because she had already died before I was born, but this story was passed down from her to my grandmother, then from her to my mother, and now from my mother to me. Because this story has been passed down through generations, there are details missing, but it still is compelling. I'll provide all the details I know. My GG was a child at the time, I don't know how old, but since she was around that age, I'll estimate that this happened in either the late 1930s or early 1940s in Turkey. She and two of her friends were walking along a beach on the Black Sea. It was one of those beaches that had rocks jutting out of the water near the shore. As they walked, they noticed far ahead of them what looked like a woman sitting on one of the rocks in the water. As they got closer, they noticed she seemed to be combing her hair and hadn't yet noticed them walking in her direction. They got closer and were able to see her entire body. The upper humanoid part of her was sitting upright on the rock like a human would, while her tail and fin rested horizontally, and my GG saw that she was not actually combing her hair. She had clumps of seaweed stuck in her hair and was pulling it out. Then she turned and saw my GG and her friends. After she saw them, she immediately dove into the water and never resurfaced. Now I want to add that, while I never knew my GG, I'm familiar with her reputation. She was a very stern and serious woman. In other words, she had zero tolerance for nonsense, so the fact that it was her who saw it and that she always swore she knew what she saw makes it hard for me to write it off. Sucks that I couldn't know more details: hair color, skin color, scales/no scales, length, etc., but it's still compelling. The next account I need to share is unsettling and quite detailed, which is why I saved it for last. I recently moved a roommate into my house. A few weeks ago we were hanging out in the living room talking about random stuff, one of those conversations that keeps jumping from one topic to another. Now I can't remember why I brought up mermaids, but she told me that when she was 5 years old, she saw one. She's 40 now, so this happened somewhere around 1991. She was in the Florida Keys with her family. One of the days they were there, the entire family went out to the water to go snorkeling. She swam a little further away from her family, and while she was underwater, she saw what might be the creepiest description I've heard yet. It was male but looked more like a child than an adult. It was hairless. The top of the head was shaped similar to a mohawk, like a significant protrusion at the top middle of the skull/scalp area running down it from front to back. The hands were heavily webbed, with no spaces between the fingers. Its neck was covered in gills. The color of the eyes was very light, either white or light gray, and they were significantly bigger than human eyes and bulged out immensely. She said the eyes bulged out so much it looked like they had little clear domes over them. The body was covered in big thick scales that she compared to a tarpon fish. The fin was similar to a fish, V-shaped, but she said that the tips of the fin had these long, thin, string-like spikes that moved in a way like they had a mind of their own, like the fin was moving one way while they were doing their own thing. I live in the countryside in Minas Gerais, Brazil. I was not born here, but I learned about a kind of monster people really believe in. They call this kind of monster corpo secco, or dry body. From the way they describe it, it's like a zombie mummy, a very thin walking cadaver. Corpus seccos are very aggressive and territorial, throwing huge stones and boulders at people who dare venture into their territory. Sometimes they hide in people's cellars, and it's a very dangerous situation. They are the result of the slow and painful solitary death of very evil people. Instead of decaying like any other dead body, their hatred keeps them going as a corpus secco. I've never met a corpus secco, so all I have is second-hand information, but I've listened to many people telling horrific stories of corpus seccos they've seen. Right now I have a few favorites. Durchu is an Irish monster resembling a giant otter, sometimes featuring canine, fish, or reptilian traits, and it appears similar to a northern European crocodile in terms of its ecological niche and relationship with humans. It's a ferocious creature that will attack and take down humans. A clud is a hybrid between an orca and a wolf in Inuit mythology, often transforming into the appropriate creature when on the land and water. It's just such a cool concept for a creature, and it visually seems spectacular. Plus it's a contender for the coolest possible fantasy mount. I've always been really partial to shapeshifter mythology, so I have a few from that. Selkies, almost a hybrid of traditional werewolves and mermaids, where it's almost like a fae but can change form between human and seal, shedding their skin to change form. It's interesting too because it gives us a look into pre-Christian shapeshifter myths in the British Isles, before the practice was completely demonized, being both helpful and dangerous. Were hyenas, while not at all consistently this way, and not the only type of this shapeshifter, were hyenas are cool because they shift from animal to human, not the other way around. As a big zoology enthusiast who is currently fascinated by hyenas and their relationship with humans, I find this myth to be particularly interesting. Furthermore, if you want to see more of this, look into Japanese mythology. They have several variations of creatures that can change into humans. Tariakshk, you know, that really cool but really inaccurate depiction of a Wendigo where it's a human reindeer hybrid monster. This is similar, but unlike the Wendigo, it appears human. I need to research whether it's harmful or just deceptive, but it looks cool. I'm from the Baltimore area, and the big urban legend of my mother's time was Black Aggie, a famous, spooky but quite beautiful, statue originally displayed at Druid Ridge Cemetery in Pikesville. The figure is seated and wrapped in a voluminous cloak and hood, and its name was Grief. Teenagers would dare each other to sit in Aggie's lap at midnight or give her a kiss, and if her eyes started to glow red, that meant you were cursed and doomed to be haunted by her until you end yourself out of madness. My mom went with a group of her friends, and she is quite bold. While everyone was milling around in the dark and hesitant to go first, my mom exclaimed, "Y'all are a bunch of wuss babies," before hopping up onto Aggie's lap. She leaned close like she was whispering in her ear and said something like, "Don't feel bad, Aggie, they're just a bunch of useless Philistines. I still love you," and gave her a smooch. She hopped back down again, and her friend was like, "That was great, you're way braver than these big manly men. Loved it when your eyes went wide when you kissed her cheek." My mom didn't mention what supposedly happened to her friend about it for something like 20 years, but when she leaned to kiss her, she could have sworn she felt the statue move as if she had raised her knees the slightest bit, as if Aggie had gone on tiptoe while still sitting. My mom had a reputation for being tough as nails and impossible to intimidate. However, she didn't want to admit that she was terrified, so she acted normal and quickly left the situation just in case. They eventually moved that statue out of the cemetery because Aggie kept attracting too many teenage thrill seekers, but my mom was still sorry to see her go. She wasn't eager to sit on her lap at the stroke of midnight again, however. Here's one from my college town, specifically geared towards the college community since it took place on the campus, but the town talks about it and has even written articles about it in the local newspaper around Halloween. The town, very small even with the college, where I went to college, had a dormitory known as Swope Hall that was almost entirely unused. It was set up with single rooms, one student to a room, as opposed to the other dormitories, which had 2 students to a room, and the suites, which were 3 connected rooms with 2 students to a room. Typically, the only people that inhabited this dorm were students that had issues with getting along with any of the roommates they paired them with or students living on campus during the summer. Otherwise, it was typically half, 3/4 empty all year round and very creepy. The legend says that when the college was first started, one of the biggest donors was the Swope family, hence why the dormitory and some other of the university's assets were named after them. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Back in those days they didn't have the same safety regulations they do now, and Mary Swope, daughter, had a nasty habit of eating the chips of paint, lead, she scratched off the walls. Over the years her sanity began to wane, and she became more and more violent and erratic. Her parents feared her insanity would put a shadow over their name, so they chose to lock her up. Of course, doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with her because, again, there was a lack of understanding about the dangers of lead paints. So to protect their family, they kept her locked in her room upstairs. The family began to avoid interaction with Mary as much as possible. They would simply feed her and keep her locked in her room. Even on holidays they wouldn't let her come out to be with the family. Mary's sanity continued to devolve, and she began to feel betrayed by her family. People who are crazy don't typically realize they're crazy after all. She thought they were being unjust, and before long she couldn't take it anymore. She leapt out of the only escape available to her, the window. Mary Swope died that night, and shortly after, the surviving Swope family moved away. The family had difficulty finding a buyer for the house, but being the wealthy family that they were, this was no issue. When they were approached about donating to the college, they donated the house and land it sat on. The house was torn down, and the foundation was increased to become the first dormitory on the campus and thusly named Swope Hall. But that wasn't the end of the Swope family legacy. Over the years students who have gone into and even lived in Swope Hall have reported a number of strange and unexplained phenomena. Mysterious cold breezes brushing past them. Doors opening or closing unexpectedly. Some have even reported seeing a strange visage of a young girl in an old-fashioned nightgown sitting in corners of unused rooms. Some have heard strange whispers but were unable to make out the words. One year, for a fundraiser, some students set up a haunted house in the dormitory, and partway through, the fire alarms were mysteriously activated, forcing the fundraiser to end prematurely. The oldest dormitory remains, to this day, one of the college's most mysterious and creepiest places on campus. Nightmares from Hawaiian mythology. In Hawaiian mythology, nightmares are the deadly ghosts of ancient Hawaiian warriors. The nightmares are the vanguard for a sacred king, chief, or chiefess. On the nights honoring the Hawaiian gods Kane, Ku, and Lono, or on the nights of Kanaloa, they are said to come forth from their burial sites or to rise up from the ocean and to march in a large group to ancient Hawaiian battle sites or other sacred places. The legend says the night marchers are normal-sized warriors, dressed for battle, carrying spears and clubs, and some are beating war drums and blowing tones from conch shells to announce the advancing of their march. According to the myth, they are suspended in air, their feet do not touch water or ground as they traverse through the night, and they leave no evidence of their visitations. They march in darkness after sunset and march as a group continuously until just before sunrise. Anyone living along their path may hear chanting, sounds of blown conch shell tones, and marching noises in the night. The following signs are a foul and musky death-like odor and torches getting brighter and brighter as the night marchers get closer. Night marchers might appear during the day if they are to escort a dying relative to the spirit world. Ancient Hawaiian beliefs state that any mortal looking upon or being seen in defiance toward the marchers will die violently. Night marchers remain unaffected by barriers placed in their path. Some people maintain that if the mortal lies motionless, face down on the ground, they are showing proper respect, fear, and deference to the night marchers, and they will be spared. Additionally, mortals can avoid harm or death from night marchers by being fortunate to have an ancient ancestor marcher present to recognize them. As they encounter the mortal, they will call out now, which means mine in Hawaiian. No one in the warrior procession will harm them. Legend says planting living tea, cordyline sp, shrubs around one's home is said to keep away all evil spirits and will cause the night marchers to avoid the area. They are said to walk through houses with doors and back doors placed in a straight line. This is a story from India. A few of my friends from my hometown had been admitted to a college in a city named Pune, India, in 2008. After initially adjusting to a new city and environment, as well as making new friends, they found 2 flats in parallel buildings for rent near the college within a couple of months. The 8 boys decided to move there because it was inexpensive and allowed them to avoid the rules and restrictions of the college-run hostel. On the first weekend, after they had moved in and settled down, they decided to party and then proceeded to drink at a highway place that serves food and allows drinking with a few more of their classmates. With the flow of topics, the topic moved towards ghosts and the paranormal, with everyone telling or making up stories of their own. One local guy from Pune then started talking about a place simply known as the Mansion based on Residency Road, Pune. It is an actual place that is claimed to be one of the most haunted places in Pune. You can even see the videos of that place online. He described the place as an abandoned mansion that used to be a British club, claiming he spent a night there on a dare with friends and experienced negative energy during his stay. After hearing this, they felt emboldened and laughed at the guy for his story, daring each other to visit the mansion for some fun. 5 minutes later, they all left and rode towards the mansion on 3 bikes, 2 bikes with 3 people each and 1 bike with 2 people. They also picked up more liquor and some tandoori chicken for snacking. When they reached the mansion, its gate was unlocked and there was no guard on duty. They just waltzed right in and started roaming around this dilapidated premises full of overgrown shrubs and bushes while shouting and screaming at each other. They explored the location with the help of mobile flashlights. All of them found a clearing in the courtyard of the place and proceeded to sit on the ground and start drinking, smoking, and snacking. Upon completion, they chuckled heartily and decided to head back home. On the way out of the door, a friend decided to piss on a tree. Midway through the act of peeing, he started screaming and running. These boys who were with him thought he was just joking until he ran out of the gate, got on his bike, and rode away while leaving the rest of his friends stranded. They got out, and 7 of them somehow managed to get back home on 2 bikes in a drunken and confused state. They thought of confronting their friend after returning to their flat, but these guys saw him crying in agony and cradling himself in the living room. All of them asked what happened. He said his entire back was burning up with pain. They took off his shirt and saw that he had multiple scratch marks across his back. They tried to calm him down, but then he said, "Abdek kuda royage, the dogs are going to cry/whine." Within seconds of his statement, all the dogs in the neighborhood began crying/whining as if on cue, and he started slapping himself repeatedly. Then he said, "Abdek darways ki gani bayaji, now the doorbell is going to ring," and the doorbell started ringing repeatedly in a few seconds. Everyone was shocked because the door was left open when they came in, and no one was there on the other side in the corridor. It was empty. After that he got up and angrily walked towards the empty door and started yelling and cursing. When they asked why he was doing it, he said, "Wa said, darways ke bahar kati hai our zoro se has rahi hai, bol rahi hai hum logako zindanai kodagi." She is standing outside the door and laughing. She is saying she is not going to spare any of us. One of them immediately called his parents and narrated what had happened. They asked him to shut the door immediately without looking up/ahead and light a lamp and an incense stick in the puja room, and all of them should gather and recite prayers. They repeated what the parents said and continued praying through the night as the ringing of doorbells and door banging continued. Around the break of dawn, the situation came to a halt, and the affected individual simply passed out or fell asleep. He slept all day and woke up in the evening. During the day, a boy's relative had arranged for a pandit, Hindu priest, to take them back to the mansion, where they offered prayers and made offerings for penance. When he woke up in the evening, he had no recollection of the night before. Things were fine and back to normal once again. Don't let them in. I'm a 26-year-old. I served in the Army from 2007 to 2012. I'm just a normal guy with a family and a house. I'm in no way odd or weird or anything like that. I'm sure if you asked my wife, she'd say differently, but that's a different story. So I was listening to your show the other night, and I distinctly remember when I was around 7, there were 2 kids who came to my house and tried to make my mom let them in. These kids were no older than I was, and they just didn't seem right. It's exactly as you described, odd clothes, flat voice. I didn't know them because I knew every kid on the 3 blocks from the left and the right. I remember trying to see them, but my mom kept pushing me aside, saying, "You need to go to your room, now." I ran to my room with my brother, and from the room I could see the front door from around the corner, and they were gone. I remember hearing my mom and dad arguing about letting them in and calling the police. My dad did not want them in the house, and my mom was saying he was crazy and that they are just kids. That's why my dad yelled about the eyes. When my dad yelled about the eyes, my mom said they did not have black eyes. My dad is not a man that should ever be messed with. I'm just saying that he is a monster of a man. Even now at over 60, you wouldn't mess with him. So, to scare him, that just doesn't happen. Well, that's when I hear a loud slam against my window and then another 3 or 4 knocks. I go back to the window, about to hold up the blinds to see what it was, and my dad runs in and shouts, "Don't let them in." And picks both me and my brother up and puts us in the bathroom. I hear him shouting to leave and that he will defend his family and that he has weapons. About 5 minutes later my dad comes in, and he makes us leave the house for ice cream. He never talks about this, and when you ask him, he gets quiet and changes the subject. The story is real. I'm not making it up. If you see someone waving you down on a desolate highway, don't stop. I was on an assignment for the Army, making my way up from San Antonio, Texas, to Tacoma, Washington. It was a long drive, and they gave me 6 days to report to my new unit, but I didn't mind. I love road trips. There's nothing like the freedom of exploring the world by yourself. The first day of my journey, I planned to get as much driving in as possible so I could spend a few days in Utah, a sort of mini vacation, you could say. This was January, and the days were short, so maximizing the amount of daylight I had was crucial. I got up extra early that morning, carried the last of my bags out to my Corolla, signed out of my old unit, and hit the road at roughly 5 a.m. It was an amazing day. I saw the landscape transform around me as I headed farther west than I had ever been in my life. From the San Antonio metropolitan area to the savannas of the Edwards Plateau to the pancake flat farmland of the Great Plains region, America's breadbasket. Finally, the farms opened up into prairie, and I saw the "Welcome to New Mexico, the land of enchantment" sign. Now I was really in the middle of nowhere. Continuing on US Route 380, I eventually found myself in Roswell. I could have gotten a few more hours of driving in and made it to Albuquerque, but I figured since I was in no rush, I might as well see what Roswell had to offer. Who knows if I would get a chance to visit again. As a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious, as Mr. Ballin would say, I took a self-guided tour of the shops and attractions. The next day, I continued to Albuquerque, then westward on Interstate 40. By the time I reached Gallup and started northbound on US Route 491, I still had 2 hours of driving left before crossing the border into Colorado and another 45 minutes before I would get to Cortez, my planned stop for the night. However, my daylight was already running out, as sunset was at 6 p.m. I got Starbucks and refreshed myself for the final stretch. It was supposed to be easy. Just a straight shot. But looking back on it now, I figured that had I decided to stop in Albuquerque instead of Roswell the night previous, I would have already been in Colorado by now and possibly be making my way into Utah. I would have saved myself from what was waiting for me on that desolate highway. Route 491 stretched far into the Navajo Nation. On either side of me were endless expanses of prairie bookended by dark indigo mountains on the horizon. To my left, the sky glowed a faint orange-purple, the light slowly dying down like smoldering embers in a fire until finally plunging the land into darkness. Every now and then, I would see the forlorn headlights of another car passing by, which gave me a bit of relief that I wasn't alone. I also had my road trip playlist on to keep me company, and call me ironic, but Hotel California was playing. After passing the small, lonely town of Newcomb, the next piece of civilization would be Shiprock. However, between the two was a 36-mile stretch of absolute nothingness. An abyss I had to cross. I was not ready for what I was about to witness. After several miles, and having not seen another car on the road, I saw something strange emerge from the horizon. Barely lit by the moonlight, I thought it was a road sign at first. Then as I came closer, I realized it was a person, walking on the shoulder of the road, heading in my direction. I squinted, trying my hardest to focus on the figure. In the darkness, I could tell they were wearing a poncho of some sort, with long, black hair flowing down past their chest. Who could be walking out here, all alone, at night? I thought. Whoever it was, they had no lights, no reflectors, and no strobes of any kind to signal to passing cars that they were there. And they walked on the pavement, dangerously close to oncoming traffic. I pulled to the left a bit, giving them a wide berth. Suddenly, my stereo cut out, as if I had turned it off. The screen went completely dark, and my phone disconnected from Bluetooth. While this was unusual, it certainly did happen from time to time, so I thought nothing of it. As I approached, I saw the person raise their right arm, as if to flag me down and hitch a ride. Oh no, I thought. There's no way that's happening, buddy. As my headlights swept by, I realized it was a man, dressed in a button-up shirt, a wool poncho, jeans, and cowboy boots. His large belt buckle glinted as the lights passed him. But in that split second, I realized with abject shock that not only were his eyes painfully wide open, but they seemed to be tracking me. Somehow, he was able to see me through the glare of my headlights and look me dead in the eyes, not breaking contact until I passed. I was shaken for a bit, but my nerves gradually subsided. My stereo abruptly turned back on, and my music continued playing. I brushed everything off as simply my imagination. The darkness and the shadows are playing tricks on my mind. Besides, the man was behind me. I figured he must have been drunk. Indian reservations sadly had high rates of alcoholism. I looked in my rearview mirror. He was gone. I couldn't see him. Maybe he's too far behind me? No, that couldn't be. It must be too dark. Maybe. I drove on, trying to figure out what had just happened, but at the same time, forcing myself not to think about it. Just when I thought I had moved on, I saw another shape in the distance. Getting closer, I realized it was another figure. Another person walking alone at night? There's no way. They walked along the shoulder of the road, swaying back and forth. Slowly, I could make out that this person was also wearing a poncho. Then I saw what looked like long, black hair, reaching down past the chest. No. There's no way. It was the man. The same man, but how? The man raised his arm again, trying to flag me down. What did this guy want? I kept up my pace, with no intention of stopping for any reason. Just like last time, my stereo turned off again. Suddenly, the man leapt out onto the road, arms waving frantically. I swerved into the left lane, narrowly avoiding him. In my headlights, I noticed he had the same wide-eyed look, his gaze locked onto mine. I also saw that his clothes did not look as they did the first encounter. Once they were clean, if not well worn, but now they were soiled and tattered, rags barely hanging onto his withered frame. His hair was wild and unkempt, with clods of dried dirt stuck in the locks. But his eyes remained the same. My heart nearly burst through my chest at the sudden shock. Hyperventilating, I slowed down and glanced into the rearview mirror to make sure he was all right. Nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to see. The man was running. He was sprinting towards me. I centered the wheel and accelerated, hoping to get as much distance from him as possible. But as I continued to speed up, so did he. Faster and faster I drove, but every time I looked in the mirror, I would still see him right behind me, perfectly keeping pace, his body tinted red by my tail lights. I could feel my temples throbbing and my hands getting slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I was sick to my stomach. There's no way. I looked forward, hoping to see a faint glimmer of light from the town ahead. But I was still too far away. I looked back at the rearview mirror. The man was gone. I should have been relieved, but I knew better. Where did he go? I looked around, hoping to regain a visual on him. I couldn't see anything. Taking a deep breath, I refocused on the road but kept my guard up. Just keep driving, I told myself. Only a few more miles to go. Out of the corner of my right eye, I saw something. Another shape. It wasn't the man, at least, I didn't think so. I glanced over, bracing myself for whatever was going to meet my sight. It looked like an animal. Some kind of animal, though I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Under the moonlight, I could see it running alongside my car, its forelimbs reaching out in long strides, its back undulating like a dog. Closer and closer it came. The closer it was, the more of it I could see. Little by little. Then I noticed, its limbs were far too long for its body. Its body was too short. It had no tail. The head was oddly round. And from it came a trail of long, black hair. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car's engine harder than it had ever been pushed before. By now I was clocking well over 110 miles per hour. But this creature, it kept up. It wasn't phased. It simply ran faster and faster to match my speed. Just what was this thing? How could anyone or anything run this fast? The entity seemed to have endless stamina. Just how long could it keep this up? Just how much faster could it go? Soon, my car would hit its top speed. And then what? How long could it maintain that before breaking down? It wouldn't be long until my engine overheated. But regardless, I would eventually run out of gas. And when I do, what would happen if that thing got me? At 120 miles per hour, my car had reached its limit. This was the fastest I could go. But the creature continued its pursuit. My temperature gauge was approaching the red, and so was my tachometer. I couldn't keep this up any longer. Suddenly, like the beacon of a lighthouse on a tumultuous sea, the first light of Shiprock came into view. It was close. So close. If I could just go a little longer, I could make it into town. To safety. I pressed on. I fixed my eyes on the lights, growing brighter on the horizon. They bloomed outwards, glimmering in the night air. Though it was a small town, it was a sight for sore eyes in my situation. Looking in my periphery, I saw the undulation of the creature's spine as it kept pace with my car. But now, it was slipping away, steering farther and farther from the road. It suddenly hit me just how hard my heart was beating. Beads of sweat dripped down my face. I looked over. The creature was gone. But this time, the feeling of dread had also gone with it. My stereo once again turned back on, and as my music resumed, I breathed a deep sigh of relief. I let off the accelerator. The Manta creature, whatever it was finally gone for good. Having white-knuckled the steering wheel the whole time without realizing it, my hands were extremely sore. But I was glad to have made it through. A week later, I told another soldier in my unit about what I had experienced. Being originally from Albuquerque, she was familiar with the Native American legends of the Southwest. The conversation steered toward a certain creature that she would not dare speak the name of. She also told me that the highway I took was well known for all sorts of paranormal phenomena. Google what Route 491 used to be called, and everything will make sense. Be careful out there. A small encounter with the Fae? This event just happened only a few minutes ago, so we're still processing it, but a few weeks ago, my husband lost his favorite pocket knife. It was a gift from his brother, and he brings it to work with him every day, and when he gets back home, he places it with his wallet and keys in our little key dish on our mantel. He has never misplaced it. Well, it disappeared one morning, and he has been searching our house all over nearly every day. Today he searched again and was cleaning our cluttered table in the hopes of finding it there, but no such luck. He spoke to me again and told me how disappointed he was that he couldn't find it and believed it was truly lost. I was in the kitchen myself, and I hadn't been feeling well, but I said, okay. I'm going to need whatever entity it is, be it Fae or whatever, to return our stuff now. Right now. I expect to see it in a visible place. My husband just rolled his eyes and said, are you missing something too? I only shrugged and told him, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I expect our stuff back. I then grabbed the coin for the Vasilopita my mother-in-law gave me and went to put it in our prayer closet. I put it away, and as I closed the door, my eyes went up to the top of the bookshelf next to our prayer closet, and right in front of my eyes, in the very front and center of the top of the bookshelf, lay the pocket knife. I picked it up and noticed that there was no dust on it, even though the other items on top of the bookshelf had collected dust, despite my efforts to blow the dust away with compressed air every few weeks. I turned to my husband and handed it to him, and his eyes were shocked. No. Where was it? I pointed to the bookshelf. It was right on top in the front. Right in plain sight. He put a hand up over his mouth. I just kept trying to tidy up around the house, and he just said, I'm going to need some time to digest this. We had searched everywhere for weeks. Although I have been sick for a few weeks, which has affected the cleanliness of our house, we have thoroughly searched cupboards, cars, the bathroom, and every corner of our home. We are Orthodox Christian. We believe in the miraculous and strange, yes, but our own tiny house has never had anything very strange happen in it, and we've been here for years. However, I wonder, was it just a case of a misplaced item being overlooked until it was spoken out loud and the brain decided to work overtime on that particular issue? Or did something more strange and unusual than what is normal occur? Here is a fascinating myth from the native Apsaluk people of North America. As the tale goes, there once was a creature known as Red Woman. Not much is known about her, except that she was a very wicked woman who roamed the plains. One day, Red Woman entered the hut of a couple while the man was out hunting. She ended the woman and realized she has twins. Red woman picked up one of the unborn twins and chucked it behind the curtain of the hut, and the other she yeeted into the nearby river. However, both boys survived, and their father soon found the boy in the hut, naming him Chucked behind the curtain. The father raised him as a normal child despite the supernatural circumstances of his birth, but one day the boy asked his father to make 2 bows for him. He did not have friends, so why didn't he ask for just one? He told his father that he wanted 2 bows so he could switch them every now and then, but the father suspected there was more to it. He made the bows and quietly followed the child as it went towards the nearby river. Indeed, he had been playing with his brother in secret, for his brother was changed by the magic of the red woman and turned into a strange creature. It had sharp teeth and a certain degree of control over the water. The red woman's creation of these creatures remains unknown to me. The father later confronted his son and told him that he knew he had been playing with his brother in secret. Together they lured the creature into a trap where it was captured by Chucked behind the curtain and his father, who dragged him to the top of a hill, where the rising tides couldn't reach them, lest the creature could summon a wave of water from the river to escape, and burned incense under his nose to turn it back into a human child. The plan succeeded, shattering the magic spell and restoring the boy's humanity. His father named him Throne in Spring. The 2 brothers and their father lived a happy life. One day, one of the brothers told the other that they should go to wake up their mother. For surely, their mother must have been asleep for a long time. And so they went to their mother's grave. But the dead woman was, of course, unresponsive. One of the boys spoke, "Mother, your pot fell over." And the grave began to stir. The other boy said, "Mother, your dresser fell over," and the woman sat up. The first boy spoke again, "Mother, your mortar and pestle fell on the ground," and the woman climbed out of her grave, having magically returned to life by the inherent magic of her 2 children. She combed her hair and said that she had slept for a very long time. And so she returned to her husband. The Apsaluk Indians actually have several stories about the adventures of the 2 twin brothers, including several stories of them killing evil monsters. Most of them follow a set structure. The father told his 2 sons that they should never play near a certain location because a horrible monster dwells there and kills travelers who venture into its domain. The brothers disobey their father and go anyway, meet the monster, and find some way to outsmart and defeat it. They always defeat the monster with their cunning and wit, never with weapons or raw strength. I like the Inuit myth of Nulyajuk, the sea goddess. Long ago, there was an innocent Inuk girl. She was completely ordinary, save for the fact that she refused to marry a man. No matter how many young men her father would bring her, she would always refuse every one of them. The girl was exceptionally pretty, and she had very long, black hair. But she remained single. One day, a handsome young hunter appeared in the village. None of the villagers had ever seen him before, but he brought with him a huge stash of freshly caught fish. Clearly, he must have been an exceptionally powerful fisherman. The girl's father, an old man named Saver Kong, thought that this man was the perfect match for his daughter. "So many fish," he yelled. "Clearly this man is rich and talented beyond our wildest dreams." And so the girl was forced to marry the handsome hunter. She was no longer given a choice. After the wedding, the hunter revealed his true form, that of a giant bird spirit, usually a fulmar, which is often used by the Inuit to symbolize the wind. The spirit grabbed the girl in his claws and carried her with him to his nest. Here, the girl was miserable. Her strange husband did not treat her well. She lived in a nest, and she had nothing to eat but fish. Realizing his mistake, her father, Saver Kong, was determined to rescue his daughter. He grabbed his axe, climbed in his boat, and rowed in the direction the creature had taken its bride. When he arrived at last, he carefully watched the nest before making his move. Saver Kong climbed into the nest and battled the bird spirit for his daughter's freedom. After a fierce battle, Saver Kong won, and the creature was slain. Quickly, he grabbed his daughter and set out to row back to their village. But the other fulmar birds had found the body. Since the newlywed spirit was dead and his wife was nowhere to be found, the birds figured out what had happened. Enraged, they set out in pursuit, and it wasn't long until they caught up with Saver Kong and his daughter, quickly rowing away from the nest. The birds performed a ritual to summon a spirit from the deep oceans, a primordial, nameless being from the depths, and beseeched it to catch the little boat. "Hear us, O spirit of the seas," they spoke. "One of our own was slain, and the culprit is trying to get away with the wife he stole from our dead comrade. Bring the perpetrator to justice and sink his boat." And so the spirit caused a mighty storm, the likes of which Saver Kong had never seen before. The little boat rocked and bounced on the waves, but it became clear that the two would never escape. Thus, Saver Kong made a horrible decision. If he ended his daughter, perhaps the spirit would take its prize and let him escape. And so, he threw his daughter overboard. But the girl, for obvious reasons, did not agree with this plan and climbed back aboard. No matter how many times her father threw her in the water, she always tried to climb back aboard. And so, out of pure desperation and fear, Saver Kong grabbed his axe, and he brought down the weapon on the fingers. Unable to grab the boat or hold onto it, she ultimately sank into the black depths of the ocean. But her hatred for her father, and for men in general, was so great that she did not die. Instead, the wounds on her arms closed, her legs transformed into a tail, and she became Nilyajuk, the goddess of the sea. Also called Sedna, Tikanaluk, Nirivik, or Tikanakapsaluk, among other names, she is one of the most important deities of the Inuit belief. Her fingers and palms fell down into the sea and transformed into the first seals and the first whales. It is from the flesh of Nilyajuk that all sea mammals descended, hence, she is known as the mother of sea mammals. Sedna is a feared goddess, and that is why her true name has been lost to time. Inuit people think that saying a spirit's true name is dangerous because it may summon the spirit. This is why all the names I just listed are actually nicknames or descriptive terms used to refer to this entity, such as she who never wanted to marry or the goddess under the sea or simply the one who lives in the deep. Keep in mind that she is not entirely evil, however, and when Sedna is pleased, she provides humanity with boons, such as abundant seals and fish to eat. When she is angry, she recalls all the marine mammals being in a cavern at the bottom of the ocean. Besides being the goddess of the sea, Nilyajuk is also the keeper of the underworld. She resides in a magical prison at the bottom of the ocean where sinners go after their death. And the very first prisoner of this underworld is Saver Kong, her father, and he is still there today. The Kluddy, an evil spirit that takes the form of a bipedal black dog wearing a chain around its neck, was rumored to roam the south of the Sonian forest. Here are some old folktales. A girl returned from the fair in Essenbeek with her boyfriend. On the way the friend said, "Give me your handkerchief, because I have an errand to run here. If Kluddy comes with his shack, I'll throw that handkerchief, and he'll leave you alone." The friend, however, was Kluddy himself with his shack. When she returned home, the girl discovered that her friend had the threads of the handkerchief between his teeth. She immediately ended the relationship. Kluddy was often encountered in the Kruistrat between Sint Rochus and Essenbeek. A woman who was taking her vegetables to the market at Brockle Castle met Kluddy on the way. However, the woman was not intimidated and whipped the apparition. Kluddy clutched at the horse, but the woman managed to run away. To protect themselves from Kluddy, people prayed a lot. A man from Bellingen, who often returned from the fair in the evenings drunk, often had the feeling that there was a heavy dog on his shoulders that was being carried. The man then said that he had been ridden by the mare. The man was then completely sweaty when he got home. When people saw a willow tree in the dark, they often believed that it was a man approaching them. Kluddy, with his shack, showed up at midnight with a chain that was making a lot of noise. A girl had a relationship with a boy from Essenbeek, who always had to be home at 10:30. One day, however, the two returned from a ball through the Hallerbows around noon. The boy spoke to the girl, "Go ahead, I have to pee. If you should come across anything, throw this red handkerchief at the apparition." Moments later, the girl saw Kluddy approaching his shack. Kluddy was a teaser who often allowed himself to be carried by passers-by, who got all sweaty from the heavy weight. The girl quickly tossed the red handkerchief to Kluddy, who tore the fabric completely. Meanwhile, the girl ran home. When she saw her boyfriend the following Monday, a man returning from his field through the mud paused by the stream to wash his clogs. Suddenly the man felt two hands on his shoulders and heard a voice shout, "Carry." The man had to wear Kluddy until he was all sweaty. When he got home, he told his mother what had happened to him. Then the woman said, "If that happens again, you have to say half job, and then you will only have to carry it 10 meters. And if you are going to wash your clogs by the stream again, say a prayer beforehand." When the man ran into Kluddy again, he followed his mother's advice, which meant that he had to carry Kluddy only 10 meters. Many sorceresses lived on the Malahide. A man from Lembeek who returned from the fair on the Malahide around 11:45 got lost on the way. The man sat down on the floor and fell asleep. The next morning he awoke on the dunghill of a farm. The man had been enchanted by Kluddy. A girl used to be told by her parents, "Don't walk through that narrow alley at night, because that's where Kluddy is with his shack." It was believed that Kluddy jumped passers-by on their backs. People jumped, and Kluddy had to carry him all the way. A woman going to the barn one evening to milk the cows heard chains rattling behind her. Then the woman felt forelegs on her shoulders. The woman went to the door of the stable, where the weight was lifted from her shoulders. However, she didn't dare look back. The next day the woman said that Lauder had been sitting with his chin on her back. A man was approached at the fair by a gentleman who asked, "Aren't you going home yet?" The man replied, "No, I will stay for a while, because it is good here. The gentleman also asked if the man had any money, for he could give him as much money as he needed. However, the man did not need anything. On his way home, the man had to carry the Lord. The latter said to him, "You didn't want to go with me before, well, then you'll have to carry me now." The man had to carry the Lord until he reached the door of his house. In the inn, people often talked about Clutty after the card game. One day the forester of the Halderboes entered the inn. This man claimed to be afraid of nothing at all, not even Clutty. However, the men in the inn wanted to test the ranger's audacity. One of them stood in a sunken way with a chain and a white sheet until the ranger passed. Seeing the apparition, the ranger pulled out his twin barrel and fired twice at the ghost. The ranger was very upset when he learned that he had shot his best friend. In the past, when people met Clutty on the road, they would say, "In Jesus' name, half the track," after which Clutty would step aside for them. What people sometimes also say is, "All that God keeps is well kept," or "Today is Saturday, tomorrow is Sunday." As with any mythical figure, it is difficult to figure out exactly what is true. What is certain is that our Clutty has served as a bogeyman to keep generations of children good. After all, they didn't want to be taken away by Clutty. Weird experiences are tied to my tribe's folklore, and other stuff. I'm a skeptic, I really don't believe in the paranormal. But lately, I've been thinking about experiences that I just can't explain. For some preface, I'm Native American. But it's only been this year that my mom got in contact with the family on the reservation. She went up to the reserve for a week to talk to them and came back with a lot of interesting stories and some parallels to my life. The shades and gray men, if I'm remembering correctly, are what they call the hallucinations we all have. I've had stress-induced hallucinations my entire life, and so has this side of my family. But we all see the same things. A shade is like a tall, spindly, faceless creature with no hands or feet, just points. At least generally that description. The gray men are small, faceless figures that appear in the dark. Pretty self-explanatory, I know. My great-something grandmother was a psychic. If anyone actually ends up being interested in seeing this, I'll try to find some info on her. But she apparently located the head of a missing person. I don't have much information to share about her right now. My family drains batteries. I can't find an explanation for this, honestly, I don't fully believe it. I've always broken electronics really easily, but I'm unobservant and clumsy. My mom's stuff breaks too, but I guess she can be clumsy also. But when my mom visited the family, she brought a camera. Apparently, the battery drained faster than should be possible, she hadn't even really used it at all. I'm sure there's a rational explanation, so when I visit, in June, I'm going to try to do some experiments. I also had a thing that followed me up until I was 9 that I called the Pitman, and when my mom told them about it, my room got saged, so that's fun. Honestly, I'm just curious what people think about this. Spring-heeled Jack. Before I was even a ghost hunter, I was doing investigations on my own. In 1994, I went to London, England, and went to the sites where the infamous Spring-heeled Jack frequented. If you don't know who Spring-heeled Jack is, let me tell you. Spring-heeled Jack was first sighted by witnesses in 1837. He was described as a monster that was able to leap incredibly high. He could leap from rooftop to rooftop or cemetery fences that were 12 feet high. He was seen all around London and other small towns nearby, such as Liverpool. He had clawed hands and eyes that were bright flaming red, and witnesses said that blue and white flames would at times come out of his mouth. Some witnesses said he spoke perfect English and at times wore a helmet. When looking at his face appeared as devilish. He was truly a frightening creature to look at. His clothes were described as white oilskin and tight-fitting. Some witnesses say he wore a cloak. 2 attacks that Spring-heeled Jack committed left England in shock and disarray. In October 1837, Mary Stevens was confronted by Spring-heeled Jack, and she was kissed on the face. She was fondled by Spring-heeled Jack's clammy cold hands. Jane Alsop was also attacked by Spring-heeled Jack, and he scratched her repeatedly on the neck and arms. When I went to London, I made contact with Richard Baines. I met Richard on the Jack the Ripper East London tour. I overheard him speaking to his girlfriend about Spring-heeled Jack, and it piqued my curiosity. When I went to England, I had made plans to visit Stonehenge, Westminster Abbey, Piccadilly Square, the Tower of London, the Thames River, and other famous sites, but when I got to talking with Richard, this is what he told me, from my best recollection. Paul, Spring-heeled Jack is still with us. In May of 1987, I was looking from my balcony. It was dusk, and I could make out the shadow of a man leaping from one rooftop to another. I saw him leap across 3 rooftops in total and then vanish. I know what I saw, and I believe to this day it was Spring-heeled Jack. I asked Richard where those rooftops were and went with my ex-wife Patricia and son Jason to the locations and tried to determine how long the length of the leaps must have been. I estimated the so-called spring-heeled jack must have leapt 10 feet from roof to roof with possibly an 8-story drop if he were to miss his target. Richard seemed very sincere, and I can only wonder what he saw on that day. I visited Lavender Hill in London to see the area where spring-heeled jack was sighted and tried to take my mind back to the days of the sightings. I could only wonder how so many people saw this creature, and their stories seemed so precise in their descriptions. When they described the events, they were consistent, and there were no apparent contradictions. How can so many witnesses be lying? Was it some kind of mass hysteria? Perhaps what they were seeing was an interdimensional creature. I don't believe they were witnesses to something extraterrestrial, as no UFOs were seen during the sightings. It appeared that spring-heeled jack would appear and vanish mysteriously. It seems that spring-heeled jack was able to enter a portal into our reality and jump into his own reality. My last investigation into spring-heeled jack was my visit to Newark, New Jersey, in 2005. A man I will simply call John emailed me and told me that he saw spring-heeled jack in 2001 at his home. A man with devilish looks, in an outfit that almost looked like a tuxedo, was peering at John through his front yard window. As John stared back at this man, it appeared that he leapt straight up into their front yard tree. John went outside with a kitchen knife and looked into the tree where spring-heeled jack was standing on a top branch. Spring-heeled jack looked down at John, and John noticed his eyes were glowing red. Chills went up and down John's spine, and as he continued to look, spring-heeled jack faded out into nothingness. John never knew about the legends of spring-heeled jack but had contacted me after reading a blurb I did on a UFO story, where I briefly mentioned spring-heeled jack. I met John at my hotel in Newark, and after he told me the story, he never witnessed this creature again. I asked him if he had any other paranormal experiences, and the only thing he could recall that was somewhat paranormal is that he thought he would be in a car accident soon and even dreamed of a car accident. About 1 week later, after his thoughts of an impending car accident, he was involved in a head-on car accident that landed him in the hospital with broken ribs and a broken foot. 3 mountain bikers reportedly saw a reptilian humanoid. Tucson, Arizona. A group of 3 mountain bikers reportedly saw a reptilian humanoid last week in the middle of a trail located in the Sonoran Desert. The bicyclists were riding the 24 hours in the Old Pueblo race course, a 17-mile trail, when they spotted the creature. "It's a tough one," said G. Johnson, 34, is a self-described businessperson from Tucson. "It is a 24-hour track, so you better come prepared with more than enough food and water. There are times you just want to go back and wish you had never gotten there in the first place. But when you see what nature has to offer you here, well, those regrets dissipate rather quickly." Johnson states that he and 2 other friends were halfway into the track when something terrifying made the group consider canceling the ride. "We had been riding for about, I don't know, maybe 9 hours, taking breaks every now and then. Then Michael says he needs to stop for a minute. We are waiting for him to finish when all of a sudden we see this long figure walking across the trail. He is maybe about 6 foot tall and very, very skinny, and he had an awkward gait, like a monkey, or a man with a disease, almost robotic, kind of," he told the news. According to the eyewitness, 2 of the men were watching the strange animal while the third one, Michael, was unaware of what was happening. "Then all I remember about Michael is him saying, 'What the hell is that?' or something like that. But he sounded far away. He probably used a different word instead of hell. The thing is, we had somehow walked a little towards the thing. Don't ask me why. Maybe to look at it better, not knowing what it was. Then," Johnson says, "the creature heard Michael speak and, apparently taking notice of the intruders, its head took an eerie 280-degree turn. He stopped, and it made eye contact with me, and I could see him clearly. The eyes were kind of like a snake's but black and with a yellow stripe in the middle of the eye. It had green and red scales on the face and head. The red color was kind of like the same as the desert sand there, and it looked like it had a sandy texture too. It didn't have a nose, only 2 holes on it. I couldn't see any ears or hair. A red mouth that looked like it had blood around it, but it didn't look like it was bleeding, it looked like a pattern. It reminded me of a chameleon, but it looked like a person too." Allegedly, the creature raised its long arms with strange-looking claws that looked like a branch full of thorns and waved at them, emitting a loud chattering sound with its teeth. Then it rapidly ran away, in a fashion that reminded the witness of a lizard trying to hide. "He looked like he was examining us, and then he ran into the desert. We thought about going back the same way we came, but we thought it didn't matter, since we were in the middle of the track anyway. We were scared, to be honest. None of us had ever seen anything like it. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt longer than that, At least to me. So after we talked about it for a while, we decided to go on and finish the track. Johnson believes that what they saw was real and not a product of their imagination. When you listen these stories online or watch them on TV, well, you think, man, these people are crazy, on meds or something, or in need of attention, but this has made me a believer. There have to be more of them out there. If there's one, there's got to be two at least, right? I know most people won't believe a word I said, that's the way I used to be. I don't blame them at all. But they are out there. Now I'm not saying this is an alien or a chupacabra or anything like it, all I'm saying is I have never seen anything like it in my life. But I am no biologist, so what do I know?